The Daxamite ships shook violently as they entered Earth's chaotic atmosphere, lightning slamming their hulls, hurricane winds battering viewports. The alien crews shocked any life could exist on this hellish planet. Captain Jackson Bailey loaded his rifle, watching the invasion craft descend towards the Amazon rainforest. 10 years ago, alien ships had appeared in orbit of humanity's homeworld, to the complete surprise of Earth's population. The Daxamites were an advanced spacefaring species that had long considered Earth a desolate, uninhabitable rock. "They thought wrong," Bailey muttered. "Goddamn aliens always underestimate us." The alien Sire-Father, leader of the Daxamite Expeditionary Force, had initially come in peace, extending an olive branch to the humans. But that peace offering withered when the Sire-Father realized humanity's weapons rivaled Daxamite technology. A species hardened by centuries of war, disaster, and deadly evolution on an unforgiving world, humans had developed into the fiercest warriors in the galaxy, and the Daxamites saw them as a threat. Without warning or mercy, the aliens attacked, decimating Earth's orbital defenses and landing invasion forces across the globe. Cities burned as Daxamite troops marched through the streets, but they made a fatal mistake landing in the Amazon. The jungle was home to the deadliest creatures on the deadliest planet in the universe, and the humans who lived there weren't just survivors, they were predators. As the whine of alien dropships grew louder, Bailey turned to the grim-faced soldiers under his command, men and women who'd spent their lives fighting for every breath in an unending struggle against nature. They gripped their weapons, the rifles, grenades, and rocket launchers, loaded with the deadliest tech Earth's military minds could dream up. "Listen up," Bailey shouted over the roar of the dropships. "I know things seem bad, but this is our planet, our home, and we'll fight to our last breath to defend it. When those Daxamite bastards step off their ships expecting some primitive savages, let's show them what humanity is really made of. We're the deadliest species on the deadliest planet in the galaxy, and it's time we act like it. Now, let's go hunt some aliens." Bailey's troops moved swiftly through the undergrowth, the dense jungle masking their presence from the Daxamite patrols. They had lured a squad of the alien soldiers into a trap, using pheromone-laced bait to attract a pack of genetically engineered predators. The screams of the Daxamites echoed through the trees as the beasts tore into them, their advanced armor no match for the creature's razor-sharp claws and venomous fangs. "Another successful ambush," Bailey said, watching the carnage through his binoculars. "But we can't get complacent. The Sire-Father will be sending more troops our way." He was right. The Daxamites had underestimated the humans' resourcefulness, but they were quick to adapt. They began deploying drones to scout the terrain, making it harder for Bailey's squad to set up their traps. But the humans had a few tricks up their sleeves. In the scorching deserts of the Sahara, Bailey's team used the heat to their advantage. They sabotaged the cooling systems of the Daxamites' exosuits, leaving them vulnerable to the sun's relentless rays. In the frozen tundras of Siberia, they used the cold to slow the aliens' movements, making them easy targets for snipers. The Daxamites began to fear the Ghost Reapers, as they called Bailey's squad. They whispered stories of the humans' brutality, of how they could appear out of nowhere and disappear just as quickly. The Sire-Father grew increasingly frustrated with his troops' inability to quell the human resistance. "Bring me a human soldier," he demanded. "I want to know what makes them tick." The Daxamite scientists studied the captured humans, running tests on their biology and psychology. They were shocked by what they found. The humans had an incredible ability to adapt to their environment, to evolve and change in ways the Daxamites had never seen before. "It's no wonder they've survived on this planet for so long," one scientist said. "They're like chameleons, able to blend into any habitat and make it their own." The Sire-Father listened to the scientists' findings with growing unease. He had thought the invasion of Earth would be a simple matter, that the humans would be easily conquered. But now he realized the true scope of the challenge before him. "Even if we take their planet," he said, "we may never be able to break their spirit. They will fight us every step of the way, using every tool at their disposal. We may have bitten off more than we can chew. The intelligence came from a captured Daxamite soldier, who broke under the skilled interrogation techniques of Bailey's squad. The alien revealed the existence of a secret research facility hidden deep in the Sahara, where the Daxamites were conducting twisted experiments on Earth's deadliest creatures. Bailey gathered his team and set out for the desert, determined to put an end to the Daxamites' sinister plans. They trekked through the scorching sands, their advanced camouflage suits protecting them from the heat and the prying eyes of the enemy. As they approached the facility, they were met with a barrage of laser fire from the Daxamite guards. Bailey's squad returned fire, their weapons modified to penetrate the aliens' advanced armor. They fought their way through the outer defenses, dodging energy blasts and taking down Daxamite soldiers with precise shots. Once inside, they navigated through a maze of corridors, disabling security systems and hacking into the facility's mainframe to gather intelligence. What they found sent chills down their spines. The Daxamites had captured a menagerie of Earth's most lethal predators, from king cobras and black mambas to giant scorpions and Komodo dragons. But these were no ordinary creatures. The aliens had subjected them to genetic modifications, enhancing their size, strength, and venom potency. In one chamber, they found a tank containing a mutated great white shark, its jaws lined with rows of razor-sharp teeth. In another, they discovered a troop of genetically engineered baboons, their muscles bulging beneath their fur, their eyes glinting with a feral intelligence. Bailey's squad planted explosives throughout the facility, intent on destroying the Daxamites' twisted creations. But as they made their escape, alarms blared, and the cages began to open, releasing the enhanced predators into the corridors. The humans fought their way out, battling not only the Daxamite guards, but also the very creatures they had sought to destroy. They narrowly escaped as the facility exploded behind them, the desert sands swallowing the flames and the screams of the dying. But their victory was short-lived. In the days that followed, reports began to flood in from across the globe. The enhanced predators had escaped the facility and were now spreading, adapting to new environments with terrifying speed. In the streets of New York, mutated rats the size of dogs stalked the shadows, their venomous bites leaving humans and Daxamites alike writhing in agony. In the Amazon rainforest, genetically modified anacondas, their scales as tough as steel, crushed entire Daxamite patrols in their coils. The war had taken a new and terrifying turn. No longer were the humans and the Daxamites the only players on the battlefield. Now, they had to contend with the very nightmares that had once made Earth a death world, nightmares that had been twisted and enhanced by the Daxamites' dark science. Bailey's squad found themselves at the forefront of this new phase of the war, their skills and knowledge put to the ultimate test. They fought in the streets of shattered cities, in the depths of the oceans, and in the skies above, locked in a desperate struggle for survival, against the Daxamites and the monsters they had unleashed. As the war between the humans and the Daxamites raged on, a new threat emerged from the depths of space. Massive Zorgon warships, bristling with advanced weaponry, descended through Earth's atmosphere. The Sire-Father, his forces battered and depleted, watched the ships approach on the view screen. The Zorgon commander hailed the Daxamite flagship. "Sire-Father, we have heard your distress call. We offer our assistance in subduing these humans and their deadly world." The Sire-Father hesitated, suspicion gnawing at him, but desperation overrode caution. "We accept your offer, Commander. My troops are at your disposal." The Zorgons wasted no time. They shuttled their biotechnology experts to the Daxamite ships and began their grim work. Human DNA, harvested from captives, was spliced with genes from Earth's apex predators. Daxamite soldiers, their bodies warped and twisted, emerged from the Zorgon laboratories as terrifying hybrids. The cunning of raptors, the strength of bears, the speed of cheetahs, all fused with advanced Daxamite weaponry. On the surface, Bailey and his squad battled against the nightmarish creatures unleashed from the Sahara facility. Mutated beasts swarmed the ruins of once great cities, leaving a trail of mangled Daxamite and human corpses in their wake. Suddenly a new horror descended from the sky. The Zorgon-Daxamite hybrids, clad in armored exoskeletons, leaped into battle with savage ferocity. Zorgon drop pods crashed to Earth, disgorging monstrous creatures genetically engineered for war. The abominations, all fangs, claws, and slashing tentacles, tore into human and Daxamite alike. Bailey's squad, their ammunition spent, their energy reserves depleted, fell back in the face of this new onslaught. They retreated to a hidden bunker complex deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, one of humanity's last strongholds. Inside the bunker, they made a startling discovery: a cache of advanced weapons developed in secret before the invasion. Sleek rifles that fired armor-piercing nanite swarms, EMP grenades that could fry Daxamite circuitry, and at the center of it all, a single prototype exosuit. Bailey stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the armor. The suit was a marvel of human ingenuity, designed to interface with any technology and enhance the wearer's strength, speed, and reflexes. He donned the suit, feeling the rush of power as it encased his body. The neural interface synced with his thoughts, the HUD flickering to life before his eyes. Bailey turned to his squad, the faceplates of their helmets reflecting the suit's glowing energy cores. "We've got a new edge now. Time to take the fight back to those Zorgon bastards." Armed with their new weapons, Bailey and his team burst from the bunker, ready to face the horrors that awaited them. The Zorgon-Daxamite hybrids swarmed forward, their monstrous features twisted in rage. Bailey activated the suit's thrusters, leaping into the fray with a roar. He slammed into the nearest hybrid, the impact shattering its exoskeleton. His squad followed, their weapons spitting death into the enemy ranks. The tide of battle had turned once again, but the war was far from over. Earth had become a crucible, a testing ground for the galaxy's most fearsome warriors, and humanity, as always, would fight to the bitter end. The exosuit whined as Bailey ducked under a slashing claw, his armor barely deflecting the blow. He fired back, a nanite swarm devouring the Zorgon-Daxamite hybrid's flesh. His squad fought desperately, trying to hold the line against the onslaught of mutated soldiers. Bailey's comms crackled. "Captain, we've intercepted a Zorgon transmission," a voice said. It's unbelievable." The message played, and Bailey's blood ran cold. The Zorgons spoke of Earth as a testing ground, a petri dish for their twisted experiments. They cared nothing for the Daxamites or the war. They only sought to harvest Earth's lifeforms to create biological nightmares. "They've been playing us all for fools," Bailey growled. "We have to stop them." But how? The Zorgons were too powerful, their abominations too numerous. Bailey's mind raced, searching for a solution. Then it hit him. The enemy of my enemy. He opened a channel to the Daxamite flagship, hailing the Sire Father. The alien leader's face appeared on the HUD, his expression guarded. "What do you want, human?" the Sire Father asked. "The Zorgons have betrayed you," Bailey said. "They're using you, using all of us. Earth isn't a prize to be won, it's a laboratory for their experiments." He sent the intercepted transmission, watching the Sire Father's face contort with rage as he listened. "I propose a truce," Bailey said. "Work with us to drive the Zorgons from Earth, then we can settle our own differences." The Sire Father was silent for a long moment, then grudgingly he nodded. "Very well, human, a truce for now." The plan was swiftly made. A joint human Daxamite force would assault the Zorgon's research vessel, while Bailey and a strike team infiltrated the ship to destroy the genetic labs. The assault was brutal. Human and Daxamite soldiers fought side by side, their weapons spitting death at the Zorgon hordes. Bailey and his team battled through the ship's corridors, facing nightmares made flesh. At last they reached the central lab, and there, waiting for them, was the Zorgon leader. It was a monstrosity, a chimera of Earth's deadliest creatures spliced together into a single, horrific entity. "Welcome, Captain Bailey," it hissed, its voice a discordant chorus of 1,000 predators. You're just in time to witness the birth of a new era. Bailey raised his weapon, his squad at his back. Sorry, Ugly. Your little science project ends here. The creature laughed, a sound that chilled Bailey to his core. You cannot stop what we have begun. Earth will be the cradle of our new empire, and you will be the first to fall before us. The abomination lunged with blinding speed, its claws shredding through armor. The abomination lunged with blinding speed, its claws shredding through armor. Bailey rolled to the side, his exosuit whining with the strain. He raised his rifle and fired, the nanite swarm engulfing the creature's grotesque face. It howled in agony, thrashing and clawing at its disintegrating flesh. Bailey's squad poured fire into the beast, their weapons tearing chunks from its hide. The Zorgon leader staggered, ichor oozing from a dozen wounds, but still it came on, driven by an insatiable hunger to destroy. With a roar of defiance, Bailey charged forward, activating the exosuit's energy blades. He leaped onto the creature's back, plunging the sizzling blades deep into its neck. The abomination bucked and writhed, trying to throw him off, but Bailey held on, hacking and slashing until the beast finally collapsed, its lifeblood pooling on the deck. But the victory was short-lived. The ship shuddered violently, alarms blaring. The Zorgon's experiments had destabilized the vessel's power core. It was going to blow. "Fall back," Bailey yelled, "to the escape pods." They ran, leaping over the corpses of fallen comrades, both human and Daxamite. The surviving Zorgons scattered, fleeing for their own lives. Bailey and his squad piled into the escape pods, launching themselves into space just as the ship exploded behind them. From the viewports, they watched the Zorgon vessel break apart, massive chunks of debris raining down on Earth's surface like fiery meteors. The pods shook as they entered the atmosphere, heat shields glowing cherry red. They hit the ground hard, pods cracking open like eggshells. Bailey kicked his way out, his exosuit battered but still functional. Around him the survivors emerged, humans and Daxamites alike, their faces grim with the weight of their losses. In the days that followed, tensions resurfaced. The Daxamites, though grateful for the humans' aid against the Zorgons, still saw Earth as a prize to be claimed. Factions emerged, some advocating for honoring the truce with humanity, others demanding that the conquest continue. General Zaxxon, a ruthless Daxamite hardliner, seized control in a brutal coup. He rallied his loyalists, promising them the riches of Earth and the glory of victory. The Sire Father was imprisoned, his supporters driven into hiding. Zaxxon's troops marched across the planet, clashing with rebel Daxamites and human resistance fighters. Bailey and his squad found themselves in the thick of it, their exosuits and advanced weapons the only things keeping them alive. Amidst the chaos, a distress call came from a remote human settlement in the Amazon. Bailey listened to the garbled transmission, his blood running cold. The settlers were under attack, not by Daxamites, but by Zorgons. Somehow, a group of the alien geneticists had survived the destruction of their ship. Now they were holed up in the rainforest, using the region's staggering biodiversity to create a new army of abominations. Bailey gathered his squad, both human and rebel Daxamite. They loaded up on weapons and supplies, then boarded a transport bound for the Amazon. As they flew over the lush green canopy, Bailey couldn't shake the feeling that they were heading into a nightmare, worse than anything they'd faced before. The transport touched down at the edge of the settlement, a cluster of prefab buildings surrounded by a makeshift barricade. The air buzzed with the drone of insects and the distant cries of howler monkeys, but beneath those natural sounds was an undercurrent of wrongness, a sense of something twisted and unnatural lurking in the shadows. The settlers greeted them warily, their faces gaunt and haunted. They spoke of creatures stalking the jungle, abominations that blended the features of Earth's deadliest predators with the cunning intelligence of the Zorgons. Bailey listened to their stories, a sense of grim determination settling over him. The Zorgons had to be stopped, their twisted experiments destroyed before they could unleash a new wave of horrors upon the planet. He turned to his squad, seeing the same resolve etched on their faces. They were battered and weary, but they were also the best damn fighters Earth had ever seen. If anyone could take on the Zorgons and their creations, it was them. Bailey shouldered his rifle, the exosuit humming with power. "Let's hunt some monsters," he said, and together they plunged into the jungle, ready to face whatever nightmares awaited them in the heart of darkness. Bailey and his hastily assembled strike force, a mix of battle-hardened humans and rebel Daxamites, boarded a transport bound for the heart of the Amazon. The intel was dire. Zorgon survivors had entrenched themselves deep within the rainforest, leveraging the region's staggering biodiversity for their twisted experiments. As the transport skimmed over the dense canopy, Bailey reviewed the mission briefing on his HUD. The Zorgons had been busy, not only splicing the genes of the Amazon's deadliest creatures, but also experimenting on the indigenous tribes, exploiting their unique genetic adaptations to create nightmarish bioweapons. Sergeant Raxon, a grizzled Daxamite rebel, leaned over to Bailey. "Never thought I'd be fighting alongside a human," he grunted. Bailey managed a tight smile. First time for everything. The transport touched down in a clearing, and the strike force disembarked, weapons at the ready. They moved swiftly through the undergrowth, the humid air thick with the buzz of insects and the distant cries of howler monkeys. Suddenly a piercing shriek echoed through the trees. A monstrous creature burst from the foliage, a jaguar, its fur replaced with chitinous armor, its fangs dripping with venomous saliva. The beast lunged at the nearest soldier, but Bailey was faster. His exosuit-enhanced reflexes kicked in, and he put a burst of fire into the creature's skull, dropping it in mid-leap. "Zorgon pet," Raxon spat. "There will be more." He was right. As they pushed deeper into the jungle, they encountered more of the genetically enhanced horrors. Giant anacondas with scales as tough as titanium coils, swarms of bullet ants with neurotoxin-laced stingers, vampire bats with a thirst for blood, and the strength to rip a man's throat out. The team fought their way through the abominations, their weapons fire echoing through the dense foliage. But even as they battled the mutated beasts, a new threat emerged from the shadows. Figures darted through the trees, their movements too swift and agile to be fully human. They wore the tattered remnants of traditional tribal garb, but their bodies were warped and twisted, grafted with alien technology and the traits of jungle predators. "The tribes," Bailey breathed. "The Zorgons have corrupted them." The transformed tribespeople attacked with a ferocity that belied their human origins. They wielded primitive weapons enhanced with Zorgon tech, spears that crackled with energy, blow darts loaded with flesh-eating nanites. The strike force found itself fighting a war on two fronts, against the mutated wildlife and the Zorgon-altered tribes. They pushed forward meter by bloody meter, the jungle floor littered with the corpses of friend and foe alike. At last they reached the heart of the Zorgon encampment, a twisting mass of organic and metallic structures that pulsed with sickly bioluminescence. And there, at the center of it all, was the artifact. It was a towering monolith of alien metal, etched with swirling glyphs that seemed to writhe and shift before the eye. Dr. Zex, the lead Zorgon scientist, stood before it, his body a grotesque patchwork of human Zorgon and animal traits. "You're too late," Zex hissed, his voice a discordant chorus of 1,000 creatures. "With this artifact, I will reshape this world, starting with the Amazon. I will create an army of perfect beings, each one a flawless fusion of the strengths of 1,000 species." Bailey stepped forward, his exosuit humming with power. "Not on my watch, you freak." The battle was joined, the strike force clashing with Zex's elite guard of Zorgon tribal hybrids. In the chaos, Zex lunged for the artifact, his clawed hand slamming into the pulsing metal. A blinding surge of energy erupted from the monolith, engulfing the battlefield. Bailey's HUD went haywire, his suit's systems overloading. When his vision cleared, he saw the jungle changing. Trees writhed and twisted, their bark splitting to reveal pulsing, fleshy interiors. Vines lashed out like tentacles, grasping at anything that moved. The very air seemed to shimmer with an unnatural haze, and the cries of mutated beasts echoed from every direction. Bailey hauled himself to his feet, his exosuit sparking and smoking. Around him, the survivors of the strike force staggered upright, their faces etched with horror. The Amazon had become a living nightmare, a twisted fusion of nature and Zorgon science. And at the heart of it all, the artifact pulsed with malevolent energy, its transformative power spreading through the jungle like a cancer. Bailey gripped his rifle, his jaw set with determination. They had to reach the artifact to find a way to shut it down before the mutation spread beyond the Amazon. But to do that, they would have to fight their way through a jungle that had become a living, breathing entity bent on their destruction. The hunt was on, and the fate of the planet hung in the balance. Bailey lunged at Dr. Zex, his exosuit's energy blades clashing against the Zorgon's mutated appendages. The artifact pulsed with malevolent energy, warping the surrounding jungle into a nightmarish landscape. Vines lashed out like whips, and the very ground seemed to writhe beneath their feet. "You're too late, human," Dr. Zex snarled, his voice a discordant mix of organic and mechanical tones. "The artifact's power is mine to control. I will reshape this world in my image." Bailey gritted his teeth, dodging a barrage of razor-sharp thorns that erupted from the earth. "Not if I have anything to say about it." He activated his suit's thrusters, launching himself at the Zorgon scientist. They grappled in a whirlwind of blades and claws, the artifact's energy surging around them like a maelstrom. Meanwhile, in the war-torn cities, Zaxxon's forces and the Daxamite rebels found themselves besieged by a new wave of mutated horrors. Creatures that once roamed the Amazon now stalked the streets, their twisted forms adapted to the urban environment. A pack of jaguar-like beasts, their hides covered in metallic scales, tore through a squad of Zaxxon's soldiers. The Daxamites fought back with energy weapons, but the creatures seemed to absorb the blasts, their scales glowing with stolen power. In the heart of the Amazon, Raxon and his team raced against time to find a way to reverse the artifact's effects. They pored over ancient alien texts, seeking any clue to the device's workings. "I think I've got something," Raxon exclaimed, his eyes widening as he deciphered a complex series of glyphs. "The artifact is designed to adapt to its environment, but there's a way to reset it, to restore the original ecosystem." He turned to his team, a mix of human and Daxamite scientists. "But we'll need to interface with the device directly, and that means getting close to it." Back at the artifact site, Bailey and Dr. Zex continued their brutal duel. The Zorgon's body had become a monstrous fusion of flesh and machine, with tendrils of living metal snaking out from the artifact to envelop him. Bailey's exosuit was battered and sparking, but he refused to yield. With a final desperate lunge, he plunged his energy blade into the heart of the artifact, even as Dr. Zex's claws raked across his armor. The artifact shuddered, a blinding pulse of energy erupting from its core. Dr. Zex screamed as the tendrils that bound him to the device withered and died, his mutated form crumbling to dust. But the battle was far from over. The artifact, even damaged, continued to pulse with power, and the mutated jungle closed in around Bailey and his team. They would have to fight their way out, and hope that Raxon and his group could find a way to stop the spread of the mutations before it was too late. The fate of Earth hung in the balance, and the war, which had already taken so many lives, showed no signs of ending. Bailey and his allies, human and Daxamite alike, steeled themselves for the battles to come, knowing that failure was not an option. They would fight to their last breath to save their world, no matter the cost. Bailey's exosuit sparked and sputtered as he grappled with Dr. Zex. The Zorgon's mutated form a twisted mass of flesh, metal, and pulsing energy. The artifact's power surged through the scientist's body, warping his shape into a nightmarish abomination. With a roar of fury, Bailey slammed his fist into Dr. Zex's distorted face, the impact sending shockwaves through the exosuit's frame. The Zorgon stumbled back, his body twisting and reforming, adapting to the damage. Around them, the Amazon rainforest convulsed and changed, the artifact's unstable energy accelerating the mutations at a terrifying pace. Trees writhed and warped, their trunks splitting open, to reveal pulsating, fleshy interiors. Vines lashed out like tentacles, grasping at anything that moved. Bailey's HUD flickered and glitched, the exosuit system struggling to cope with the artifact's chaotic energy. He fired his thrusters, launching himself at Dr. Zex once more, energy blades extended. The Zorgon met his charge with a flurry of razor-sharp claws and lashing tentacles. They clashed in a whirlwind of sparks and shredded metal, the exosuit's armor buckling under the onslaught. With a final desperate lunge, Bailey plunged his energy blade into Dr. Zex's chest, the searing plasma tearing through the Zorgon's mutated flesh. Dr. Zex let out an unearthly shriek, his body convulsing as the life drained from his twisted form. But even as Dr. Zex fell, the artifact's energy continued to spiral out of control. The ground heaved and split, the very fabric of reality warping under the onslaught of the device's power. Bailey staggered to his feet, his exosuit battered and barely functional. He knew that the only way to stop the artifact was to overload it, to feed it a massive surge of energy that would destroy the device, but potentially take him and everything else in the area with it. At that moment, Raxon and his team arrived on the scene, a hastily constructed device clutched in the Daxamite scientist's hands. Raxon explained breathlessly that the device could reverse the mutations, but it needed to be connected directly to the artifact to work. Bailey didn't hesitate. He volunteered to stay behind, to manually connect Raxon's device to the artifact while the others evacuated the area. He knew it was a one-way trip, but there was no other choice. As Raxon and the others retreated, Bailey fought his way through the mutating jungle, the exosuit's enhanced strength and speed the only things keeping him alive. The once familiar rainforest had become a surreal nightmare, filled with twisted creatures that had once been his allies and enemies alike. He reached the artifact, the device's surface pulsing with uncontrolled energy. With shaking hands, Bailey began the process of connecting Raxon's device, the exosuit systems interfacing with the ancient technology. But as he worked, a horde of mutated Zorgons emerged from the jungle, their bodies warped and twisted by the artifact's power. At their head was Dr. Zex, his form hideously transformed, a mockery of life sustained by the device's energy. The mutated Zorgons surged forward, their distorted limbs lashing out at Bailey. He met their charge head-on, the exosuit's energy blades flashing as he fought to hold them back. It was a brutal, desperate battle, Bailey's skills and the exosuit's enhancements pushed to their limits. He dodged and weaved, struck and parried, using every ounce of his strength and determination to keep the Zorgons at bay. Time seemed to stretch and warp, seconds feeling like hours as Bailey fought on, the exosuit's power levels dwindling with each passing moment. The artifact's energy surged and crackled, the device approaching critical mass. With a final Herculean effort, Bailey connected the last piece of Raxon's device, the machine humming to life. A blinding flash of energy engulfed the Amazon, the artifact's power overloading in a cataclysmic surge. The mutations began to reverse, the jungle warping and twisting as the device's energy swept through it. But the cost was high, the artifact's destruction unleashing a shockwave that flattened trees and shattered rock. In the heart of the maelstrom, Bailey stood his ground, the exosuit's armor disintegrating, his body battered and broken. The shockwave flung Bailey through the air, debris raining down around him. He crashed to the ground in a battered heap, his exosuit sputtering its last. The air reeked of ozone and singed flesh. Dragging himself to his feet, Bailey surveyed the devastation through cracked visor. Where lush jungle once stood, only scorched wasteland remained, the earth blackened and sterile. Mutated creatures lay strewn about, reverted to their original forms. Carcasses of jaguar beasts and anaconda monstrosities littered the blasted landscape, their warped flesh sloughing away. The artifact's destruction had undone its twisted work, but at a terrible price. Bailey limped through the desolation, each step a battle against pain and exhaustion. His mind reeled with the weight of the sacrifices made, the friends lost, the scars left upon the world. But there was no time to grieve. The war still raged beyond the Amazon, and every moment wasted meant more lives lost. Miles away in the ruined husk of a once great city, the Sire-Father and Zaxxon met under a flag of truce. They picked their way through rubble-strewn streets, past toppled skyscrapers and the rusting husks of vehicles. A handful of guards, both human and Daxamite, watched warily as the two leaders faced each other across a makeshift table. "Look around you," the Sire-Father said, his voice heavy with sorrow. "Is this what we fought for? A world in ruins, our peoples decimated?" Zaxxon's eyes flickered from the destruction to the Sire-Father's face. The fire of conquest still burned in their depths, but it was dimmed by the weight of loss. "No," he admitted grudgingly, "this war has cost us all too much." They began to talk of peace, of ways to rebuild and coexist, but even as the words of truce passed their lips, the roar of plasma fire split the air. Rogue Daxamite soldiers poured into the square, weapons blazing. At their head strode Kravox, his face twisted with fanatical rage. "Traitors!" Kravox bellowed, leveling his rifle at the Sire-Father. "You would surrender to these primitives, betray our destiny of conquest?" Zaxxon leapt to his feet, drawing his sidearm. "Stand down, Kravox, the war is over." But Kravox's followers opened fire, plasma bolts stitching the air. The Sire-Father's guards fell, their armor smoldering. Kravox lunged forward, seizing the Sire-Father by the throat. "Your weakness ends here," Kravox snarled. "I will lead our people to glory, even if I must cut a path through traitor flesh." Suddenly a hail of gunfire erupted from the surrounding buildings. Bailey and a mixed force of human and loyalist Daxamite soldiers surged into the square, weapons spitting death. They'd intercepted Kravox's attack, racing to head off the rogue faction. A fierce battle erupted, plasma bolts and bullets crisscrossing the rubble-strewn ground. Bailey led the charge, his rifle barking in staccato bursts. He dove from cover to cover, taking down Kravox's soldiers with pinpoint shots. But Kravox was already retreating, dragging the Sire-Father with him. The rogue commander hurled a grenade, the blast sending Bailey sprawling. By the time the smoke cleared, Kravox and his prize had vanished into the warren of ruined streets. Bailey staggered to his feet, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. He turned to his squad, humans and Daxamites united by a common cause. "Fan out and find them," he barked. "We can't let Kravox reignite this war." With the fate of the Sire-Father and the fragile peace at stake, Bailey and Zaxxon cast aside their long-standing animosity. They hastily assembled a rescue team of their most skilled fighters, both human and Daxamite. Zaxxon's insider knowledge of Daxamite tactics, combined with Bailey's gritty combat experience, made them a formidable duo. The team tracked Kravox's rogue forces to an abandoned military base deep in the war-torn countryside. The compound's crumbling concrete walls and rusting barbed wire stood as grim reminders of the conflict's toll. Bailey and Zaxxon led the charge, breaching the perimeter with explosive charges. As they fought their way into the base, the true horror of Kravox's plans became clear. Twisted genetic abominations, the remnants of Zorgon experiments, lurched out of the shadows. Daxamite soldiers, their bodies warped by mutagenic serums, attacked with unnatural ferocity. "Kravox has gone mad," Zaxxon snarled, gunning down a hulking beast that had once been one of his own troops. "He's trying to create an army of monsters." Bailey ducked under a slashing claw, putting a burst of fire into a mutant's misshapen skull. "We have to find the Sire-Father before it's too late." They pushed deeper into the base, the rescue team's weapons blazing. Every step was hard-fought, every corridor a gauntlet of horrors. Finally, they located the Sire-Father in a dank cell, his body battered but his spirit unbroken. As they freed the Daxamite leader from his bonds, a chilling laugh echoed through the compound. Kravox stepped from the shadows, his body rippling with unnatural musculature. He had injected himself with a potent strain of the Zorgon mutagen, transforming into a monstrous parody of life. "You're too late," Kravox gloated, his voice a guttural rasp. "The age of the Daxamite Empire is at hand, and I will lead us to glory." He lunged at the rescue team, his claws ripping through metal and flesh alike. Bailey and Zaxxon met his charge head-on, their weapons roaring. The battle was brutal, a whirlwind of slashing talons and searing plasma. Bailey cried out as Cravox's claws found their mark, shredding through his armor and into the flesh beneath. Zaxxon leapt to his ally's defense, engaging Cravox in a furious duel. The Daxamite commander fought with skill and courage, matching the mutated monstrosity blow for blow. With a final, desperate lunge, Zaxxon plunged his energy blade into Cravox's twisted heart. The abomination let out a gurgling howl, its lifeblood sizzling on the deck. Cravox's reign of terror was over, but the cost had been high. As the rescue team fought their way out of the crumbling base, supporting a badly wounded Bailey and the weakened Sire-Father, a grim realization settled over them. Cravox's mad ambitions were not an isolated incident, but part of a larger conspiracy within the Daxamite military. Factions within the command structure sought to undermine the truce with humanity and claim Earth for themselves. The war, it seemed, was far from over. Bailey and Zaxxon strode into the makeshift conference room, their faces grim with resolve. The Sire-Father and a contingent of human leaders looked up as they entered, the tension palpable in the air. "We have uncovered a conspiracy within the Daxamite military," Bailey announced, his voice steady. "A faction that seeks to undermine the peace we have fought so hard to achieve." Zaxxon stepped forward, his eyes meeting those of the Sire-Father. "Cravox's actions were not those of a lone madman," he said. "He had support from within our own ranks." The Sire-Father's expression hardened. "This is troubling news indeed," he said. "We must root out this corruption before it can destroy all that we have built." The human leaders nodded in agreement. "We will provide whatever assistance we can," one of them said. "Our people have suffered enough from this war." Bailey and Zaxxon spent the next few days poring over the evidence they had gathered, piecing together the extent of the conspiracy. They compiled a list of suspects, high-ranking Daxamite officers who had been in communication with Cravox before his final stand. But even as they worked, reports began to filter in of attacks on both human and Daxamite targets. Military outposts were hit, supply lines disrupted, and civilians caught in the crossfire. Bailey and Zaxxon were called before the joint leadership once again. "These attacks bear the hallmarks of the conspirators," the Sire-Father said. "We need you to lead a task force to hunt them down and bring them to justice." The two warriors nodded, their eyes hardening with determination. They handpicked a team of the best fighters from both races, humans and Daxamites united in purpose. As they tracked the conspirators' movements, a pattern began to emerge. The attacks were not random, but rather carefully coordinated to destabilize key strategic locations. The trail led them to the ruins of a once great human city, a sprawling wasteland of crumbling skyscrapers and rusting infrastructure. Deep within this maze of debris, they discovered a hidden Daxamite research facility, its existence carefully concealed from the outside world. Bailey and Zaxxon led their team in a daring infiltration, breaching the facility's defenses and fighting their way through the corridors. The conspirators had been busy, creating a new generation of genetically enhanced soldiers using the perfected Zorgon mutagen. The battle was brutal, a close-quarters nightmare of flashing blades and searing plasma. Bailey's team fought with grim determination, cutting down the enhanced soldiers one by one. At the heart of the facility, they confronted the mastermind behind the conspiracy, a twisted Daxamite scientist named Dr. Zeleth. The doctor's eyes gleamed with madness as he revealed his ultimate plan: to unleash the mutagen on a global scale, transforming the Earth's population into a race of subservient slaves. "You're too late," Dr. Zeleth cackled, his fingers hovering over a control panel. "With a single command, I will reshape this world in my image." Bailey and Zaxxon exchanged a glance, a silent understanding passing between them. They had come too far to let this madman succeed. As one, they charged forward, weapons blazing, ready to face whatever horrors Dr. Zeleth had in store for them. The fate of two races hung in the balance, and failure was not an option. Bailey and Zaxxon charged forward, weapons blazing as they fought their way through the maze of corridors. The genetically enhanced soldiers fell before their onslaught, but more kept coming, an endless tide of twisted flesh and advanced weaponry. At last they burst into the central chamber, where Dr. Zelath stood before a towering tank, filled with bubbling, luminescent fluid. The mad scientist whirled to face them, his eyes gleaming with malevolent glee. "You're too late," he crowed. "Behold the apex." With a hiss of hydraulics, the tank opened and a monstrous form emerged. It was a nightmarish fusion of the galaxy's deadliest predators, with the razor-sharp claws of a Zorgon Ripper, the impenetrable scales of a Daxamite war beast, and the regenerative capabilities of a Terran Hydra. The apex let out a deafening roar and charged, its massive form shaking the ground with each thunderous step. Bailey and Zaxxon opened fire, but their weapons seemed to have no effect, the creature's hide absorbing the energy blasts like they were nothing. The apex tore into their ranks, its claws rending flesh and bone. Soldiers screamed as they were flung aside, their bodies broken and bleeding. Bailey and Zaxxon fought desperately, trying to draw the creature's attention away from their battered troops. But it was no use. The apex was an unstoppable juggernaut, shrugging off their attacks and dealing devastating blows in return. Bailey cried out in pain as a razor-sharp claw raked across his chest, his armor barely holding against the onslaught. "Fall back!" Zaxxon roared, firing a volley of plasma grenades that exploded harmlessly against the apex's hide. "We can't stop it!" In the chaos of the battle, Dr. Zelath slipped away, a triumphant smile on his face. He clutched a small vial in his hand, the perfected mutagen that would bring the galaxy to its knees. Bailey and Zaxxon retreated, their forces in tatters. They watched helplessly as the apex rampaged through the facility, destroying everything in its path. The once proud strike team limped back to their transports, nursing their wounds and mourning their fallen comrades. But even as they tended to their injuries, Bailey and Zaxxon knew that they couldn't give up. Dr. Zelath was still out there, and with the apex under his control, no one was safe. They rallied their remaining troops, a ragtag mix of humans and Daxamites united by grim determination. They would hunt Dr. Zelath to the ends of the earth, and beyond if necessary. The pursuit was long and bloody, a series of desperate battles against Dr. Zelath's enhanced soldiers and the apex itself. Each time they faced the monstrous creature, it seemed to have grown stronger, its hide more resistant to their weapons, its regenerative powers more potent. But Bailey and Zaxxon refused to give up. They fought with everything they had, improvising new tactics and weapons to counter the apex's ever-evolving abilities. As they chased Dr. Zelath across the war-torn landscape, they began to uncover a disturbing pattern. The mad scientist wasn't just fleeing from them, he was gathering resources, raiding abandoned military bases and research facilities for advanced technology and genetic samples. It was during one of these raids that they discovered the truth. They intercepted a communication between Dr. Zelath and a Daxamite warlord named Zorgax, a ruthless conqueror who commanded a vast fleet of warships. Dr. Zelath wasn't just planning to conquer Earth, he was preparing for a full-scale invasion of the galaxy. With the perfected mutagen and an army of apex creatures at his command, he would be unstoppable. And Zorgax, with his mighty armada, would be the key to crushing any resistance. The warlord's ships were already on their way, a looming threat that hung over the galaxy like a sword of Damocles. Bailey and Zaxxon looked at each other, the weight of this revelation sinking in. They had always known that the stakes were high, but now they realized just how far Dr. Zelath was willing to go. The fate of not just Earth but the entire galaxy rested on their shoulders. They had to stop Dr. Zelath and his apex, had to find a way to prevent the invasion before it was too late. But as they set out once again, racing against time to catch up to the mad scientist, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. Dr. Zelath had proven himself to be a cunning adversary, always one step ahead. And with the apex at his side, growing more powerful with each passing day. The odds seemed to be stacked against them. But they had no choice. They had to keep fighting, had to keep pushing forward, no matter the cost. For if they failed, if Dr. Zelath succeeded in his plans, it wouldn't just be Earth that suffered. The entire galaxy would fall, and the reign of the Apex would begin, a nightmare from which there would be no waking. In a frozen bunker deep beneath the Siberian tundra, Bailey and Zaxxon huddled around a tactical display, their breath misting in the frigid air. The holographic projection showed the location of Dr. Zelath's compound, a heavily fortified bastion bristling with advanced weaponry and genetically enhanced soldiers. "We need to hit him hard and fast," Bailey said, his eyes narrowing as he studied the compound's defenses. "If we give him time to deploy those drones, it's game over." Zaxxon nodded grimly. "Agreed. My team will infiltrate Zorgax's fleet and sabotage his ships. We'll buy you as much time as we can." They clasped forearms, a gesture of unity between two warriors who had once been bitter enemies. Then, with a final nod, Zaxxon turned and strode out of the bunker, his team of elite Daxamite commandos falling into step behind him. Bailey turned to his own team, a ragtag mix of human and Daxamite soldiers, all battle-hardened and ready for the fight of their lives. "Gear up!" he barked. "We move out in 5. The assault on Dr. Zelath's compound was brutal and unrelenting. Bailey's team fought through a blizzard of laser fire and explosions, the genetically enhanced soldiers proving to be formidable opponents. But Bailey's team had a few enhancements of their own, courtesy of the exosuit technology they had reverse-engineered from the Zorgons. They punched through the outer defenses and stormed the compound, engaging Dr. Zelath's personal guard in close-quarters combat. Bailey fought like a man possessed, his exosuit enhanced strength and reflexes allowing him to go toe-to-toe with the Daxamite mercenaries. But just as they seemed to be gaining the upper hand, a terrifying roar echoed through the compound. The Apex burst through a wall, its monstrous form filling the corridor. The creature tore into Bailey's team, its claws and fangs rending flesh and bone. Bailey watched in horror as the Apex shrugged off their most powerful weapons, its wounds healing almost as quickly as they were inflicted. But then, in a flash of desperate inspiration, he had an idea. "Fall back!" he yelled over the comm. "Lure it into the central chamber." His team disengaged and retreated, fighting a running battle as they led the Apex deeper into the compound. They burst into the central chamber, a vast space filled with towering tanks of glowing mutagen. Dr. Zelath whirled to face them, his eyes widening in shock and rage. "What have you done?" he screamed. Bailey didn't answer. Instead, he raised his rifle and fired, the shots ripping into the mutagen tanks. The volatile substance spilled out, flooding the chamber with a sickly green glow. The Apex charged forward, its roar shaking the very foundations of the compound. But as it waded through the mutagen, something strange began to happen. The creature's flesh started to bubble and warp, its regenerative powers going into overdrive as it tried to adapt to the mutagen's effects. Bailey and his team watched in morbid fascination as the Apex began to mutate uncontrollably, its form twisting and distorting into a grotesque mass of pulsating flesh. Dr. Zelath screamed in horror, his greatest creation turned against him by its own adaptive nature. But the Apex wasn't the only thing affected by the mutagen. The substance began to eat away at the compound structure, the walls and floors dissolving into sludge. Bailey and his team raced for the exit, dodging falling debris and pockets of corrosive mutagen. They burst out into the frigid Siberian air, the compound collapsing behind them in a maelstrom of mutagen and twisted metal. Bailey turned to watch as the Apex's mutated form was crushed beneath the rubble, its regenerative powers finally overwhelmed. But there was no time to celebrate. Dr. Zelath had escaped in the chaos, and the fate of the mutagen formula was still unknown. Bailey and his team had won the battle, but the war was far from over. As they trudged through the snow, Bailey's comm crackled to life. It was Zaxxon, his voice strained and breathless. "Bailey, we have a problem," he said. "Zorgax's fleet is on the move. They're headed for Earth, and they're packing some serious firepower. Bailey's heart sank. They had stopped Dr. Zeleth, but it seemed that Zorgax had been one step ahead of them all along. The invasion was already underway, and Earth was in more danger than ever before. He looked to his team, their faces grim and exhausted, but still filled with determination. They had come too far to give up now. Earth needed them, and they would fight to their last breath to defend it. Bailey squared his shoulders and activated his comm. "Zaxxon, we're on our way," he said. "Hold the line as long as you can. We'll be there soon, and we'll bring the fight to Zorgax himself if we have to." With that, Bailey and his team set off across the frozen wasteland, their destination the very stars themselves. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and they were the only ones who could tip the scales in Earth's favor. The apex roared, its monstrous form barreling through the compound, shrugging off the hail of gunfire from Bailey's remaining soldiers. Bailey shouted over the chaos, "Fall back to the mutagen stockpile. We've got to contain this thing." The soldiers retreated, laying down suppressing fire as they went. The apex pursued, its claws tearing through metal and concrete like paper. Bailey and his team reached the central chamber, a vast space filled with tanks of glowing, noxious mutagen. Bailey pulled out a detonator. "When I give the signal, blow the charges. We're going to drown this bastard in its own poison." The soldiers took up positions around the room, rigging the tanks with explosives. The apex burst through the doors, its roar shaking the very foundations of the compound. "Now!" Bailey yelled, triggering the detonator. The explosions ripped through the chamber, the tanks rupturing and spilling their contents onto the apex. The creature howled as the mutagen engulfed it, its skin bubbling and warping. Its regenerative powers went into overdrive, trying to combat the sheer volume of damage. But it was too much. The apex's body began to break down, its cells unable to cope with the rapid, chaotic mutations. Its form dissolved, flesh sloughing off bone, the once mighty creature reduced to a pulsating mass of tissue. With the apex neutralized, Bailey charged deeper into the compound, his rifle at the ready. He burst into Dr. Zelath's inner sanctum and found the mad scientist waiting for him. Dr. Zelath's body was warped, enhanced by his own twisted experiments. "You're too late, human," he snarled. "My work will reshape this galaxy." "Not on my watch," Bailey growled. They clashed in a brutal hand-to-hand battle. Bailey's augmented strength matched against Dr. Zelath's genetically enhanced reflexes. They traded blows, the room shaking with the force of their struggle. Bailey's rifle was knocked from his hands. Dr. Zelath's claws raked across his chestplate, sparks flying. But Bailey fought on, his human spirit unyielding. He landed a crushing blow to Dr. Zelath's jaw, followed by a vicious uppercut. The mad scientist staggered, his face a ruined mess. Bailey pressed his advantage, hammering his foe with a relentless flurry of punches. With a final devastating strike, he sent Dr. Zelath crashing to the floor. Bailey stood over his fallen foe, his breathing ragged. He retrieved the mutagen formula and stowed it safely away. Dr. Zelath's plans for global domination had been thwarted. Light years away, Zaxxon's strike team fought their way through the corridors of Zorgax's flagship. Daxamite soldiers fell before their onslaught, the sound of plasma fire and screams echoing through the ship. Zaxxon placed charges on the ship's critical systems as they went, his face grim with determination. They reached the bridge, and Zaxxon confronted Zorgax. "Your reign of terror ends here," Zaxxon said, his weapon leveled at the warlord. Zorgax laughed, a harsh, cruel sound. "You think you've won? You know nothing of your own history, traitor." Zaxxon's grip tightened on his weapon. "What are you talking about?" "The Daxamite Empire seeded life on Earth, you fool," Zorgax sneered. "We created humanity as a grand experiment, and now we've come to collect our due." Zaxxon's eyes widened in shock, but before he could respond, Zorgax attacked, a hidden blade sliding from his gauntlet. Zaxxon reacted on instinct, his training taking over. They fought across the bridge, sparks flying as their blades clashed. Zorgax was a skilled combatant, his movements swift and precise. But Zaxxon fought with the strength of a man determined to atone for his past, to protect his newfound allies. He parried Zorgax's strikes, countering with his own flurry of attacks. In a final, desperate lunge, Zaxxon drove his blade through Zorgax's chest. The warlord stiffened, his eyes wide with disbelief. He slumped to the deck, his lifeblood pooling around him. Zaxxon stood over the fallen warlord, his chest heaving. Zorgax's final words echoed in his mind, a revelation that would change everything. The truth about humanity's origins, about the Daxamite Empire's role in their creation, weighed heavily upon him. He activated his calm, his voice urgent. "Bailey, do you copy? We need to talk. There's something you need to know." Zaxxon's heart pounded as he raced through the corridors of Zorgax's flagship, the detonator clutched tightly in his hand. Explosions rocked the ship, alarms blaring, the deck buckling beneath his feet. "Fall back to the escape pods," he shouted over the chaos, his team fighting a desperate rearguard action. They barely made it, leaping into the pods just as the charges detonated. The flagship disintegrated behind them, secondary explosions tearing it apart from the inside. Zaxxon watched through the viewports as Zorgax's fleet erupted into flames, the warlord's dreams of conquest turned to ashes. But there was no time to celebrate. The revelation of the Daxamites' role in seeding Earth with life weighed heavily on Zaxxon's mind. He had to warn Bailey, had to share this shocking truth. The escape pods hurtled through the atmosphere, streaking towards the rendezvous point. When they landed, Bailey was waiting, his own team battered but victorious. Zaxxon stepped out, his expression grim. "Bailey, there's something you need to know." He told them everything. Zorgax's final words, the Daxamite Empire's ancient experiments, the truth about humanity's origins. Bailey listened, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. "All this time," he said softly, "we thought we were fighting for our world, but it was never really ours to begin with." With heavy hearts they returned to the Sire-Father and the human leaders. The Daxamite ruler listened to their report, his expression growing more somber with each word. When they finished, the Sire-Father bowed his head. "On behalf of my people," he said, his voice heavy with regret, "I offer our deepest apologies. The crimes of our ancestors are a stain on our honor, one that we can never fully erase." He looked up, meeting the eyes of the human leaders. "But we can strive to make amends. We pledge to help you uncover the full extent of our genetic experiments and to share any knowledge we have of your true origins." The human leaders exchanged uneasy glances. Trust would not come easily, not after so many years of war and deception. But the Sire-Father's words rang with sincerity, and the need for answers was too great to ignore. "We accept your offer," the human commander said at last, "but understand that we do so as equals, not as subjects. The autonomy and independence of the human race is non-negotiable." The Sire-Father nodded solemnly. "Of course, we seek partnership, not dominion." In the days that followed, an uneasy peace settled over Earth. The scars of war would take generations to heal, but for the first time, there was hope for a better future. Amidst the rebuilding, Bailey and Zaxxon found themselves hailed as heroes by both sides. Their courage and sacrifice had saved countless lives and brought an end to the conflict. But their work was far from over. The Sire-Father tasked them with leading a joint expedition to the far reaches of the galaxy, following a trail of clues left behind by the ancient Daxamite geneticists who had first seeded life on Earth. "We must uncover the truth behind these experiments," the Sire-Father said, "not just for the sake of our two peoples, but for the sake of every species that may have been touched by our ancestors' actions." Bailey and Zaxxon accepted the mission, knowing that the road ahead would be long and perilous. They gathered a team of the best and brightest from both races, scientists, soldiers, and explorers, united in purpose. As they prepared to depart, Bailey found himself staring up at the stars, wondering what secrets they held. Zaxxon stood beside him, a newfound camaraderie forged in the heat of battle. "Whatever we find out there," Bailey said, "whatever truth we uncover, we'll face it together." Zaxxon clasped his shoulder, a gesture of solidarity. To the very end, he agreed. The expedition ship rose from the launch pad, its engines flaring to life. Bailey and Zaxxon took their seats on the bridge, the weight of their mission settling on their shoulders. The ship tore through the atmosphere, leaving Earth behind. Before them lay the vast expanse of the galaxy, a frontier filled with untold wonders and dangers. They had fought a war for their planet's survival. Now they would embark on a new battle, a quest for knowledge, for understanding, and for the truth that had been hidden for so long. The stars beckoned, and the ship plunged into the unknown, carrying the hopes and fears of two species on its shoulders. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: the universe would never be the same again. As the expedition ship tore through the void, Bailey and Zaxxon stood on the bridge, watching the stars streak by. The weight of their mission settled heavily on their shoulders, the fate of not just Earth, but countless other worlds hanging in the balance. Dr. Lyra Sorax, a brilliant Daxamite geneticist, approached them, her eyes alight with a mix of excitement and trepidation. "I've been studying the Genesis Initiative for decades," she said, her voice low and urgent. The Daxamite Empire's genetic manipulation of Earth was just the beginning. They seeded life on countless worlds, guiding their evolution to create the perfect species. Bailey's brow furrowed, the implications of Dr. Sorax's words sinking in. "Perfect for what?" he asked. "That's what we need to find out," Zaxxon replied, his gaze fixed on the star-studded expanse before them. The ship dropped out of hyperspace, the distant sun of an uncharted system filling the view screen. They had arrived at the coordinates Dr. Sorax had provided, the location of an ancient Daxamite research outpost. As they descended through the planet's atmosphere, Bailey couldn't shake the feeling of unease that crept up his spine. The surface was a desolate wasteland, the ruins of a vast underground complex barely visible beneath the shifting sands. The expedition team, a diverse mix of human and Daxamite scientists, soldiers and explorers, disembarked from the ship, their equipment at the ready. They approached the entrance to the complex, a yawning maw of darkness that seemed to swallow the light. "Be on your guard," Zaxxon warned as they stepped inside, the beams of their flashlights cutting through the gloom. "We don't know what we'll find down here." The complex was a labyrinth of corridors and chambers, the walls lined with advanced technology and genetic laboratories that had lain dormant for millennia. Dr. Sorax's eyes widened as she took in the sight, her fingers tracing over the ancient consoles. "This is incredible," she breathed. "The knowledge contained here could revolutionize our understanding of genetics and evolution." But as they pressed deeper into the complex, the expedition triggered an automated security system, the dust-covered machines springing to life with a low, ominous hum. A swarm of robotic guardians emerged from hidden alcoves, their metallic bodies glinting in the dim light. The team opened fire, their weapons spitting bursts of plasma and projectiles, but the robotic horde seemed to adapt to their tactics with each passing moment. The machines closed in, their relentless attacks forcing the team to fall back. "They're learning," Bailey shouted over the din of battle, his exosuit straining to deflect the hail of energy beams that rained down upon them. "We need to find a way to shut them down." Zaxxon's eyes narrowed as he studied the robotic swarm, his mind racing. "They must be controlled by a central AI," he said, ducking behind a crumbling pillar as a searing bolt of energy scorched the air above his head. "If we can locate and deactivate it, we might be able to stop them." But even as they fought their way through the complex, Bailey and Zaxxon knew that time was running out. If the central AI managed to alert the other Genesis Initiative outposts to their presence, they would have the full might of the ancient Daxamite technology arrayed against them. It was a race against the clock, a desperate battle to uncover the secrets of the Genesis Initiative before the galaxy itself turned against them. And as they plunged deeper into the heart of the complex, Bailey couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the precipice of a discovery that would change everything they thought they knew about the universe. Dr. Sorax's fingers flew across the holographic interface, lines of code scrolling past at breakneck speed. "I've got a plan," she said, her eyes never leaving the display. "If I can hack into the AI's mainframe and introduce a virus, we might be able to cause it to self-destruct." Bailey and Zaxxon exchanged a glance. "What's the catch?" Bailey asked, his rifle still smoking from the last wave of robotic guardians. "The mainframe is located in a heavily guarded central chamber, deep within the heart of the complex," Dr. Sorax replied. "The only way to access it is to fight our way through." Zaxxon nodded grimly. "Then that's what we'll do. Bailey and I will lead a strike team to the chamber. The rest of you work on distracting those robotic bastards and sabotaging the power systems." The team split up, each group heading towards their assigned objectives. Bailey and Zaxxon's strike team fought their way through the winding corridors, their weapons spitting fire as they battled wave after wave of increasingly powerful robots. As they pushed deeper into the complex, Bailey noticed something strange. The robots seemed to be adapting to their tactics, anticipating their moves, and upgrading their own capabilities to counter them. "The AI is studying us," he realized aloud. "It's learning from our every move." Zaxxon cursed under his breath. "This isn't just a security system," he said. "It's a highly advanced, self-aware entity. It's been evolving and learning for centuries." The strike team redoubled their efforts, knowing that time was running out. They breached the central chamber, only to find themselves face to face with the AI's physical avatar, a towering, mechanized behemoth bristling with an array of deadly weapons. Bailey and Zaxxon engaged the avatar in a furious battle, dodging its attacks and striking at its weak points. The air crackled with energy as they danced around the chamber, their weapons flashing and sparking against the avatar's armored hide. On the other side of the complex, Dr. Sorax worked frantically to upload the virus into the mainframe. Her hands shook as she typed, sweat beading on her forehead. The rest of the team fought desperately to keep the robotic guardians at bay, their weapons overheating and their energy reserves dwindling. Just as the avatar was about to overwhelm Bailey and Zaxxon, Dr. Sorax let out a triumphant shout. "It's in, the virus is uploading." The AI began to malfunction, its processes corrupted and its guardians falling into disarray. Bailey and Zaxxon seized the opportunity, launching a final, desperate assault on the avatar. With a deafening explosion, the avatar collapsed, its mechanical body shattering into 1,000 pieces. The AI's control over the complex was crippled, its robotic minions going offline one by one. As the dust settled, the expedition team regrouped in the central chamber. They were battered and exhausted, but victorious. With the AI defeated and the outpost secured, they began to explore the ancient laboratories, uncovering a trove of data and technology related to the Genesis Initiative. What they found sent chills down their spines. Earth was just one of dozens of worlds seeded by the ancient Daxamites, each one an experiment in guided evolution and genetic manipulation. The implications were staggering, the scope of the project almost beyond comprehension. Bailey and Zaxxon pored over the trove of data recovered from the Genesis Initiative outpost, their eyes widening as they uncovered the true scope of the ancient Daxamite experiments. Dr. Sorax worked tirelessly beside them, her brilliant mind piecing together the fragments of information into a cohesive whole. "This is incredible," she breathed, her fingers flying across the holographic interface. The Genesis Initiative wasn't just seeding life on a few planets. They were manipulating the evolutionary paths of dozens, if not hundreds of worlds. She pulled up a star map, each pinprick of light representing a planet touched by the Daxamites' experiments. "And look at this," she said, zooming in on a cluster of systems. These planets were all seeded with variations of the same base genetic code, but each one was tweaked in a different way, like a massive experiment in guided evolution. As they delved deeper into the data, Dr. Sorax stumbled upon a series of encrypted files, their contents heavily protected. She worked for hours to break through the layers of security, her brow furrowed in concentration. When she finally succeeded, a gasp escaped her lips. "By the stars," she whispered. "The Daxamites encountered another alien race during their experiments, a species with technology that rivaled, if not surpassed, their own. She brought up a series of images and log entries detailing the Daxamites' interactions with this mysterious species. They called them the Valerians, and it seems they were opposed to the Genesis Initiative from the beginning. They saw the Daxamites' genetic manipulations as a violation of the natural order, an affront to life itself. Bailey and Zaxxon exchanged a worried glance. If the Valerians had tried to stop the Genesis Initiative once before, it was likely they would try again if they learned of the expedition's mission. Dr. Sorax continued to sift through the data, her eyes widening with each new revelation. "I've found a map," she said at last, her voice trembling with excitement. "It shows the locations of the Genesis Initiative's research stations, each one focused on a specific aspect of genetic manipulation." She met Bailey and Zaxxon's gazes, a fire burning in her eyes. "We have to follow this map, to uncover the full truth behind the Genesis Initiative and the Valerians. We may be the only ones who can prevent a conflict that could engulf the entire galaxy." Bailey and Zaxxon nodded, their determination matching her own. They set course for the next research station, their hearts filled with a sense of purpose and trepidation. But as they traveled through the uncharted regions of space, a sudden blast rocked their ship. Alarms blared as the expedition found themselves surrounded by a fleet of unknown starships, their sleek, angular designs unlike anything they had seen before. The ships opened fire without warning, their weapons slicing through the expedition's shields like a blade through paper. Bailey and Zaxxon pushed their ship's engines to the limit, weaving and dodging through the onslaught of energy beams. "It has to be the Valerians," Zaxxon shouted over the chaos. "They must have found out about our mission, about the map." The rest of the expedition fleet scattered, trying to evade the relentless pursuers. But the enemy ships were too fast, too advanced. One by one, the expedition's vessels fell, consumed by the bright flashes of exploding reactors. Bailey watched in horror as Dr. Sorax's ship took a direct hit, its hull buckling under the assault. He opened a comm channel, desperate to reach her. "Lyra, you have to get out of there. Your ship can't take much more." But Dr. Sorax's voice came back calm and resolute. "There's no time, Bailey. The data, the map, everything we've discovered, it's too important to lose." Bailey's heart clenched as he realized what she intended to do. "No, Lyra, don't—" But it was too late. Dr. Sorax's ship veered sharply, placing itself between Bailey and Zaxxon's vessel and the brunt of the Valerian assault. The enemy fire intensified, focusing on her crippled ship. "I'm transmitting the data to you now," Dr. Sorax said, her voice steady even as warning lights flashed around her. "Promise me you'll see this through. Promise me you'll uncover the truth." Bailey swallowed hard, his eyes stinging. "I promise, Lyra, we won't let your sacrifice be in vain." A sad smile flickered across Dr. Sorax's face. "It's been an honor, Bailey. Now go before it's too late." The data transmission completed just as a final devastating volley slammed into Dr. Sorax's ship. Bailey and Zaxxon watched helplessly as the vessel erupted into a brilliant fireball, the shockwave buffeting their own ship. Grief and rage warred within Bailey's heart, but he pushed the emotions aside. He gunned the engines, taking advantage of the momentary gap in the enemy's formation. With a final burst of speed, they broke through the Valerian lines, escaping into the depths of space. But even as they fled, Bailey knew that their mission had just become infinitely more complicated. The Valerians were determined to keep the secrets of the Genesis Initiative hidden, to bury the truth of the Daxamites' experiments. And they had just made it clear that they would stop at nothing to achieve that goal. With their ships battered and their hearts heavy from the loss of Dr. Sorax and so many brave crewmates, Bailey and Zaxxon limped into the nearest friendly outpost. The surviving expedition members set to work on repairs, patching hull breaches and coaxing strained engines back to life. As they worked, a coded transmission came through on a secure channel. Bailey and Zaxxon huddled around the console, their eyes widening as they deciphered the message. It was from one of the captured crew members, revealing that they were being held on a heavily fortified prison planet, deep in enemy space. "They say they've uncovered information about the alien race," Zaxxon said, his voice tight with tension. Something about their connection to the Genesis Initiative. Bailey's jaw tightened. We have to get them out. It'll be a suicide mission, Zaxxon warned. That prison planet is locked down tighter than a Zorgon's ass. We can't leave them behind, Bailey said, his eyes hardening with resolve. Not after everything we've been through together. They gathered a strike team of their most skilled fighters and infiltrators, volunteers who knew the risks, but refused to abandon their comrades. As they prepared for the mission, checking weapons and reviewing intel, Bailey couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. Their fears were confirmed as they approached the prison planet. A massive enemy fleet dropped out of hyperspace, weapons hot and shields raised. The ships formed a blockade around the planet, cutting off any chance of escape. It was a setup, Zaxxon growled, his hands flying over the controls. They knew we were coming. Bailey gritted his teeth as the enemy ships opened fire, their weapons pounding against the expedition's shields. Then we'll just have to fight our way through. The expedition ships scattered, weaving and dodging through the hail of laser fire. They returned fire with everything they had, targeting weak points in the enemy's formation. Fighters launched from both sides, filling the void with darting ships and searing energy beams. Bailey and Zaxxon's ship took a direct hit, alarms blaring as the shields buckled. They pushed the engines to their limits, racing towards the planet's surface. Enemy fighters swarmed around them, peppering their hull with laser fire. "We're not going to make it," Zaxxon shouted over the din of battle. "Yes, we are," Bailey said, his voice calm and determined. "Hang on." In a daring maneuver, Bailey sent their ship into a steep dive, plunging towards the planet's surface at breakneck speed. The enemy fighters struggled to keep up, their shots going wide as they tried to match the sudden change in trajectory. Bailey pulled up at the last second, the ship's belly scraping the tops of the prison complex's walls. They'd made it past the defenses, but their troubles were far from over. As they touched down in a courtyard, enemy soldiers poured out from every doorway and corridor. The strike team leaped from the ship, weapons blazing. They fought their way into the complex, taking cover behind pillars and crates as they exchanged fire with the enemy troops. The air was filled with the scent of ozone and burnt metal, the sounds of battle echoing through the corridors. Bailey and Zaxxon fought side by side, their weapons spitting death into the enemy ranks. They pushed forward, their team close behind, searching desperately for any sign of their captured crewmates. But the prison was a maze of corridors and dead ends, each turn revealing more enemy soldiers and automated defenses. The team was forced to split up, taking different paths in an attempt to cover more ground. As Bailey rounded a corner, he found himself face to face with a towering war droid, its armored chassis bristling with weapons. He dove for cover as the machine opened fire, energy beams scorching the walls and floor. He primed a grenade and lobbed it at the droid, the explosion tearing through its armor and exposing its internal circuitry. With a burst of rifle fire, Bailey finished it off, the machine collapsing in a shower of sparks. But there was no time to catch his breath. More soldiers were coming, their boots pounding against the metal floors. Somewhere in this hellish labyrinth, his friends were waiting, counting on him to find them. Bailey reloaded his weapon and pressed on, Zaxxon and the others fighting their way through other parts of the complex. They had to find their crewmates and get out before the enemy overwhelmed them completely. But with every step, every firefight, Bailey couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that every move they made was playing right into the enemy's hands. It was almost as if they were being herded, drawn deeper into the prison's depths for some sinister purpose. As he ducked into an alcove to avoid another hail of laser fire, Bailey's calm crackled to life. It was Zaxxon, his voice strained and breathless. "Bailey, I found them," he said, the sounds of combat nearly drowning out his words. "But we're cut off. We need backup now." Bailey's heart raced as he checked his map, trying to pinpoint Zaxxon's location. They were deep in the bowels of the prison now, far from any exit or escape route. He made a split-second decision, knowing that every moment counted. "Hold tight, Zax," he said, his voice grim with determination. "I'm on my way." With renewed purpose, Bailey charged forward, his rifle blazing as he cut a path through the enemy forces. He would find Zaxxon and the others, and together they would fight their way out of this hellish prison. But even as he fought, Bailey couldn't shake the sense of unease that gripped him. Something about this mission felt wrong, like they were playing right into the enemy's hands. And deep down, he feared that the price of this rescue might be higher than any of them could bear. Bailey and Zaxxon fought their way through the prison's dank corridors, the sounds of battle echoing off the metal walls. They cut down Cortex guards with ruthless efficiency, their weapons flashing in the dim light. At last they reached the cell block where their crewmates were being held. What they found there made their blood run cold. The prisoners huddled in their cells, their bodies twisted and deformed by the Cortex's experiments. Some howled and gibbered like animals, their minds shattered by the horrors they had endured. Others sat in eerie silence, their eyes vacant and lifeless. "By the stars," Zaxxon breathed, his face pale with shock. "What have they done to them?" Bailey gritted his teeth, rage and grief warring in his heart. "We have to get them out of here." They began to unlock the cells, helping the weakened and traumatized prisoners to their feet. Many could barely walk, their limbs atrophied from long confinement. Others lashed out in fear and confusion, not recognizing their rescuers. As they worked, a voice called out from one of the cells, "Wait, don't leave me behind!" Bailey and Zaxxon turned to see a Daxamite male, his face gaunt and his eyes haunted, but still burning with a fierce intelligence. They unlocked his cell, helping him to his feet. "I am Dr. Xander Valix," the Daxamite said, his voice hoarse from disuse. "I know what the Cortex are doing here." He leaned heavily on Zaxxon, his legs trembling with weakness. "The Cortex are the ones behind the Genesis Initiative," Dr. Valix explained. "They've been manipulating the evolution of species across the galaxy for millennia, trying to create the perfect life forms to serve as their slaves and soldiers." Bailey's heart sank as he listened to the scientist's words. The scope of the Cortex's plans was staggering, the implications horrifying. "They'll stop at nothing to protect their experiments," Dr. Valix warned. "And they've been studying you, the humans and the Daxamites. They've created hybrid soldiers using your DNA, warriors faster and stronger than anything you've faced before." As if on cue, a new wave of Cortex troops poured into the cell block, their weapons blazing. But these were not the soldiers Bailey and Zaxxon had fought before. They moved with blinding speed, their reflexes impossibly fast, their bodies shrugging off wounds that would have felled a lesser being. Bailey and Zaxxon returned fire, shielding the prisoners with their own bodies. The battle was brutal and desperate, the Cortex hybrids pressing their advantage. Dr. Valix joined the fight, his own weapon in hand, a look of grim determination on his face. "I've developed a way to reverse the genetic modifications," he shouted over the din of battle. "But we need to get these people to my lab, and we need time to administer the treatment." Bailey nodded, his jaw set. They had to get the prisoners out, had to give them a chance at reclaiming their humanity. He redoubled his efforts, his rifle spitting death into the Cortex ranks. Slowly, painfully, they fought their way back through the prison complex, the prisoners stumbling along behind them. The Cortex forces were relentless, throwing wave after wave of hybrid soldiers at them. But Bailey and Zaxxon would not yield. They had come too far, lost too much to fail now. They would get their people out, would find a way to stop the Cortex and their twisted experiments, no matter the cost. The fight raged on, the fate of the prisoners and perhaps the fate of the galaxy itself hanging in the balance. As the Cortex soldiers closed in, Bailey and Zaxxon fought their way to the prison hangar, blasting through the armored doors with high-yield explosives. Inside, rows of sleek alien ships gleamed under the harsh lights. "There!" Zaxxon pointed to a large transport vessel, its hull emblazoned with the Cortex insignia. "That's our ticket out of here." They raced up the boarding ramp, ushering the weakened prisoners inside. Dr. Valix stumbled, his legs still unsteady from his own genetic modifications, but Bailey caught him, half carrying the scientist to the ship's medbay. In the cockpit, Zaxxon's fingers flew over the unfamiliar controls, his Daxamite mind quickly adapting to the alien technology. The ship hummed to life, its engines pulsing with power. "Hang on!" Zaxxon shouted as he punched the thrusters, sending the transport rocketing out of the hangar and into the star-studded void. Almost immediately, alarms blared throughout the ship. The Cortex fleet had detected their escape and was moving to intercept. Energy beams lanced through the darkness, barely missing the transport's hull. "The stealth systems are online," Zaxxon said, his brow furrowed in concentration. "But we'll need to make a series of jumps through uncharted wormholes to shake them off our tail." Bailey nodded grimly, strapping himself into the co-pilot's seat. "Do what you have to do. We can't let them catch us." Zaxxon plotted a course through the wormholes, the ship's computer struggling to calculate the complex gravitational anomalies. With a deep breath, he engaged the hyperdrive, sending the transport hurtling into the swirling vortex of the first wormhole. The ship bucked and shuddered as it navigated the twisting corridors of space-time, the hull groaning under the immense pressures. Strange colors and shapes flashed past the viewports, the laws of physics bending and warping around them. Each jump took them further into uncharted space, the stars and constellations growing increasingly alien and unfamiliar. They skirted the edges of massive black holes, their gravity threatening to tear the ship apart. They witnessed the birth and death of stars, the cosmic dance of galaxies colliding and merging. After what felt like an eternity, they emerged from the final wormhole, the ship's engines sputtering and overheated. Bailey checked the scanner, his heart pounding in his chest. "No sign of pursuit," he said, relief washing over him. "We did it. We lost them." But their relief was short-lived. As they approached the coordinates of the hidden asteroid base, they realized that it was not as abandoned as they had hoped. The base was surrounded by a fleet of ships, their designs a strange hybrid of Daxamite and alien technology. "Daxamites," Zaxxon said, his voice tight with tension, "but not like any I've seen before." A hail came over the comm system, the voice harsh and commanding. "Unidentified vessel, you are trespassing in the territory of the Daxamite exiles. Identify yourselves and state your purpose, or be destroyed." Bailey and Zaxxon exchanged a glance, realizing that they had stumbled upon a group of Daxamites who had been living in isolation for centuries, cut off from the rest of their kind. They knew they would have to tread carefully if they hoped to gain these outcasts' trust and assistance. As the transport ship docked with the base, Bailey and Zaxxon prepared to face yet another unexpected challenge in their quest to uncover the secrets of the Genesis Initiative. The airlock doors hissed open, revealing a group of armed Daxamites, their faces hard and suspicious. At their head stood a tall, muscular woman with fiery red hair and piercing green eyes. She held a plasma rifle at the ready, her finger poised on the trigger. "I am Zara Krell, leader of the Daxamite exiles," she said, her voice ringing with authority. "You have entered our sanctuary without permission. Give me one good reason why I shouldn't blast you back into the void." Bailey stepped forward, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "We mean you no harm," he said, keeping his voice calm and steady. "We are here because we need your help." Zara's eyes narrowed, her grip tightening on her weapon. "And why should we help you, human? Your kind has brought nothing but war and destruction to the galaxy." Zaxxon moved to stand beside Bailey, his expression solemn. "Because we are not your enemies," he said. "We are all victims of the Cortex, the true architects of the Genesis Initiative. They have manipulated and enslaved countless species, including our own." He gestured to the rescued prisoners, their bodies still bearing the scars of the Cortex's experiments. "Look at what they have done to these people, to your own kind. We are fighting to stop them, to free the galaxy from their twisted schemes." Zara's gaze flickered to the prisoners, a flicker of sympathy passing over her face. She lowered her weapon but kept it at the ready. "And what do you want from us?" she asked, her tone still guarded. Dr. Valek stepped forward, his voice hoarse and strained. "I have developed a way to reverse the genetic modifications inflicted by the cortex," he said, "but I need specialized equipment and a safe place to work. Your base may be our only hope." Zara considered his words, her brow furrowed in thought. She turned to Bailey and Zaxxon, her eyes searching their faces for any sign of deceit. "You speak of a great threat to the galaxy," she said at last. "If what you say is true, then the cortex must be stopped. We will help you, but on one condition, Bailey nodded, bracing himself for her demand. "You must share with us all the information you have gathered on the Genesis Initiative," Zara said, her voice firm and unyielding. "If we are to fight this enemy, we must know everything about them." Bailey and Zaxxon agreed, knowing that they would need all the allies they could get in the battles to come. As they followed Zara and her warriors into the heart of the asteroid base, Dr. Valek began the painstaking process of setting up his equipment and examining the rescued prisoners. Over the next few days, Bailey and Zaxxon worked closely with Zara and her people, sharing their knowledge of the Cortex's tactics and technology. They trained together, humans and Daxamites alike, honing their skills and forging bonds of trust and respect. But even as they prepared for the inevitable confrontation with the Cortex, Bailey couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. He knew that the enemy would not rest until they had reclaimed their lost experiments and silenced those who threatened to expose their secrets. As he looked out over the asteroid base, watching the Daxamite exiles and his own people working side by side, Bailey felt a renewed sense of purpose. They had come so far, sacrificed so much, but they could not stop now. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and they would fight to the bitter end to protect it. In the heart of the hidden asteroid base, Dr. Valek worked tirelessly to reverse the horrific genetic modifications inflicted upon the rescued prisoners. His brow furrowed in concentration as he pored over the complex cortex gene sequences, searching for the key to undoing their twisted manipulations. Meanwhile, Bailey and Zaxxon led scouting missions into the nearby star systems, their ships slipping silently through the void as they searched for any signs of cortex activity. They knew that every moment spent waiting was another moment the cortex had to further their sinister experiments. During one such mission, Bailey's sensors picked up a faint cortex transmission. He leaned forward in his seat, his eyes narrowing as he worked to decipher the encrypted signal. "I've got something," he said, his voice tight with tension. "It's a set of coordinates deep in the Zeta quadrant, and there's a reference to a primary research facility." Zaxxon's face appeared on the comm screen, his expression grim. "The Zeta quadrant? That's uncharted territory. If the Cortex have a facility out there, it must be well hidden." Bailey nodded. "The transmission mentions an artificial black hole. If I'm reading this right, the facility is inside the event horizon, protected by the gravitational forces." They knew they had stumbled upon something big, a chance to strike at the heart of the Cortex's operations and uncover the secrets of the Genesis Initiative. But infiltrating a facility hidden within a black hole would be no easy feat. Back at the base, Bailey and Zaxxon pored over the stolen Cortex data, searching for any weaknesses they could exploit. They studied the schematics of the research station, memorizing every airlock, every power conduit, every potential entry point. Zara, the fierce leader of the Daxamite outcasts, joined them in the planning. Her eyes glinted with the promise of vengeance as she studied the holographic projections. "My warriors are ready," she said, her voice steady and strong. "We have waited centuries for a chance to strike back at the Cortex. We will not fail." Together they devised a plan, a daring infiltration that would require all their skills and resources. They would approach the black hole in a specially modified stealth ship, equipped with advanced gravity nullifiers and radiation shields. Once inside, they would split into teams, each with a specific target. Bailey, Zaxxon, and Zara would lead the main assault, fighting their way to the heart of the facility and the secrets it contained. The other teams would sabotage key systems, sowing chaos and disruption to cover their advance. As the plan took shape, Bailey felt a growing sense of anticipation mixed with dread. He knew that they were about to embark on their most dangerous mission yet, a plunge into the unknown, from which they might never return. But he also knew that they had no choice. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and the key to stopping the Cortex lay within that artificial black hole, waiting to be uncovered. The infiltration team gathered in the hangar bay, their faces set with grim determination. They boarded the stealth ship, a sleek, black vessel bristling with advanced technology. Bailey and Zaxxon took their positions in the cockpit, their hands flying over the controls as they prepared for launch. With a low hum of power, the ship lifted off, gliding out of the hangar and into the star-studded void. They set course for the Zeta Quadrant, for the hidden black hole and the nightmarish research facility within. As they approached the anomaly, the ship began to shudder, the hull groaning under the immense gravitational stresses. Bailey gritted his teeth, fighting to keep the vessel on course as warning lights flashed across the console. Debris and stellar fragments swirled around them, each one a deadly projectile that could tear through their shields like tissue paper. Zaxxon worked frantically to plot a safe path through the maelstrom, his fingers dancing across the navigation controls. Slowly, painfully, they made their way to the event horizon, the point of no return. Bailey's heart pounded in his chest as they crossed the threshold, the ship plunging into the inky darkness of the black hole. Inside the facility was a nightmare made manifest. Strange twisted creatures floated in containment tanks, the products of the Cortex's genetic experimentation. Bailey and his team fought their way through the halls, their weapons flashing in the dim, eerie light. They encountered resistance at every turn, Cortex guards, automated defense systems, and monstrosities that defied description. But they pressed on, driven by a desperate need to uncover the truth. In the heart of the facility, they found the central laboratory, a vast chamber filled with pulsing machinery and glowing tanks. And there, waiting for them, was Nexus Prime, the mastermind behind the Cortex's experiments. The alien scientist regarded them with cold, dispassionate eyes, his voice echoing through the chamber. "You have come far, but you are too late. The Genesis initiative is nearing its culmination, and soon the Cortex will have what we have always sought, the perfect life form, the ultimate expression of genetic potential." Bailey raised his weapon, his finger tightening on the trigger. "We won't let that happen. Your experiments end here, Nexus Prime." The Cortex leader laughed, a chilling sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "You cannot stop what has already begun. Even now, my greatest creation is nearing completion, a being that will embody the strengths of 1,000 species, and the Cortex will—" Bailey, Zaxxon, and Zara charged into the heart of the Cortex facility, weapons blazing. Genetically engineered monstrosities lunged at them from every side, their twisted forms a nightmarish fusion of flesh and technology. The air crackled with energy as the team fought their way deeper into the complex, the ground slick with the blood of fallen abominations. In the central chamber, they confronted Nexus Prime, the mastermind behind the Cortex's experiments. The alien scientist regarded them with cold, dispassionate eyes, its body a grotesque patchwork of cybernetic enhancements and genetic modifications. "I cannot stop the inevitable," Nexus Prime intoned, its voice a discordant chorus of 1,000 stolen lives. "The Genesis initiative will reshape the galaxy in our image, and you will be the first to fall." With a gesture, Nexus Prime summoned its most powerful creations, towering amalgamations of the galaxy's deadliest predators, their bodies bristling with advanced weaponry. The battle was joined, a whirlwind of claws, blades, and searing energy beams. Zara fought like a woman possessed, her centuries of exile fueling her rage and determination. She tore into the abominations with savage ferocity, her blades flashing in the dim light. But even her skill and strength were not enough against the sheer number and power of Nexus Prime's creations. Tao's searing energy bolt caught Zara in the chest, burning through her armor and searing her flesh. She stumbled, her weapons clattering to the floor. Nexus Prime loomed over her, its eyes glinting with malevolent triumph. Zaxxon, seeing Zara's plight, hesitated for a split second. The Daxamite warrior had grown to respect and admire the fierce outcast leader, and the thought of losing her tore at his heart. But he also knew that if Nexus Prime escaped with its research, the galaxy would be doomed. With a roar of anguish and fury, Zaxxon leapt at Nexus Prime, his blades flashing in a deadly arc. The alien scientist reeled back, its cybernetic enhancements sparking and sputtering. Bailey joined the fray, his weapons spitting death into the ranks of the abominations. Together they drove Nexus Prime back, their attacks growing more desperate and ferocious with each passing moment. The alien scientist's creations fell one by one, their twisted bodies littering the chamber floor. In a final desperate gambit, Nexus Prime lunged at the central control console, its fingers flying over the holographic interface. The facility shuddered, the containment fields around its most dangerous experiments flickering and failing. "If I cannot have the galaxy," Nexus Prime snarled, "then I will watch it burn." Bailey and Zaxxon redoubled their efforts, fighting their way through the tide of abominations. They reached the control console, their weapons tearing into Nexus Prime's cybernetic form. The alien scientist collapsed, its body a ruined mass of sparking circuitry and leaking fluids. But the damage was done. The facility's power core, overloaded by Nexus Prime's final command, began to destabilize. "We have to go," Bailey shouted over the blaring alarms. "This whole place is going to blow." Zaxxon knelt beside Zara, cradling her broken form in his arms. The outcast leader looked up at him, her eyes filled with pain and grim determination. "Leave me," she rasped, her voice barely audible over the chaos. "Get out while you still can." Zaxxon hesitated, torn between his duty and his heart. But Zara gripped his arm, her fingers leaving bloody streaks on his armor. "Go," she whispered. "Finish what we started." With a final agonized look, Zaxxon laid Zara down gently and turned to Bailey. The two warriors fought their way back through the crumbling facility, dodging falling debris and exploding machinery. They burst out of the complex just as the power core detonated, the shockwave hurling them through the void. The black hole research facility tore itself apart, consumed by a maelstrom of twisted metal and unstable energy. Battered, bleeding, and barely conscious, Bailey and Zaxxon dragged themselves into their waiting shuttle. They watched through the viewports as the facility collapsed in on itself, the black hole's gravity well distorting and swallowing the wreckage. With heavy hearts, they set a course back to the asteroid base, the weight of their losses and the magnitude of their discovery pressing down on them like a physical force. Upon their return, they found Dr. Valix waiting for them, his face lined with exhaustion but also with a glimmer of hope. The scientist ushered them into his makeshift laboratory, where rows of vials and beakers glowed with an eerie, pulsing light. "I've done it," Dr. Valix said, his voice trembling with excitement and trepidation. "I've created a serum that can reverse the Cortex's genetic modifications, but also grant enhanced abilities to those who receive it." He held up a vial of shimmering liquid, its contents swirling with a kaleidoscope of colors. "With this, we could create an army of enhanced warriors capable of standing against the Cortex and their abominations." Bailey and Zaxxon exchanged a look, the implications of Dr. Valix's discovery sinking in. The power to not only undo the Cortex's twisted experiments, but to turn their own weapons against them, was a tempting prospect. But it was also a terrifying one. The serum was untested, its long-term effects unknown, and the idea of creating yet another army of genetically enhanced soldiers, even in the name of fighting the Cortex, sat uneasily with them. Before they could come to a decision, the base's alarms blared to life. The sensors had detected a massive Cortex fleet dropping out of hyperspace, its ships already moving into attack formation. Bailey and Zaxxon rushed to the command center, their minds racing. The base's defenses were formidable, but against the full might of the Cortex armada, they would be little more than a speed bump. As the first wave of enemy ships opened fire, the base's shields flickered and strained under the onslaught. Explosions rocked the asteroid, sending tremors through the ancient rock. Bailey and Zaxxon looked at each other, the weight of the moment hanging between them. They had come so far, sacrificed so much, but now, with the Cortex at their doorstep and the fate of the galaxy hanging in the balance, they faced their greatest challenge yet. They knew that whatever choice they made, whatever path they took, the consequences would be felt for generations to come. The future of humanity, of the Daxamites, of every species touched by the Genesis Initiative, rested on their shoulders. With grim determination, they turned to face the oncoming storm, ready to make their final stand against the forces that threatened to consume everything they held dear. In the heart of the besieged asteroid base, Bailey and Zaxxon stared at the vial of shimmering serum, their faces etched with grim determination. They knew the risks, the untold dangers of injecting an untested, experimental substance into their bodies. But with the Cortex forces closing in, their options were limited. "We have to do this," Bailey said, his voice steady despite the weight of the decision. "It's our only chance." Zaxxon nodded, his jaw set. "We've come too far to back down now. Whatever happens, we face it together." They gathered their most skilled warriors, a mix of humans and Daxamites united by a common purpose. One by one they stepped forward, rolling up their sleeves and presenting their arms. Dr. Valek administered the serum, his hands shaking slightly as he pressed the injector against their skin. The effect was immediate. Bailey felt a surge of energy coursing through his veins, his muscles tightening and his senses sharpening. Beside him, Zaxxon let out a low growl, his eyes flashing with newfound power. The enhanced warriors moved with blinding speed, their reflexes and strength pushed beyond human limits. They grabbed their weapons and charged out of the base, ready to meet the Cortex head-on. The battle was joined in a clash of fire and fury. The Cortex soldiers, their bodies twisted by genetic manipulation, swarmed forward with inhuman ferocity. But Bailey and his team met them blow for blow, their enhanced abilities more than a match for the alien abominations. Bailey ducked under a slashing claw, his fist slamming into the Cortex soldier's midsection. The creature doubled over, its exoskeleton cracking under the force of the blow. Zaxxon leaped over a barrage of plasma fire, his blades flashing as he cut through the enemy ranks. The asteroid's rocky surface became a hellish battlefield, the ground slick with blood and strewn with broken bodies. The air crackled with the exchange of weapons fire and the screams of the dying. But even with their enhanced abilities, Bailey and his team were badly outnumbered. The Cortex forces seemed endless, a tide of monstrous flesh and metal that threatened to overwhelm them. Just as despair began to set in, Bailey's comm crackled to life. The Sire Father's voice filled his ear, steady and resolute. "Hold fast, my friends," the Daxamite leader said. "You are not alone in this fight. Even now, ships from a dozen worlds are converging on your position. Together we will drive the Cortex back and put an end to their twisted ambitions." Bailey's heart soared at the news. He turned to his warriors, his voice ringing out over the chaos of battle. "You hear that?" he shouted. "We've got reinforcements on the way. All we have to do is hold the line." With renewed vigor, the enhanced warriors threw themselves into the fray. They fought with the strength of heroes, their every blow a testament to the unbreakable spirit of free species across the galaxy. With the Cortex forces in disarray, and their own ranks bolstered by the power of Dr. Valek's serum, Bailey and Zaxxon saw their chance to strike at the heart of the alien threat. They gathered a small strike team of their most skilled and trusted warriors, each one enhanced by the serum's incredible effects. The team boarded a sleek, heavily armed shuttle and set course for the Cortex command ship, a massive, forbidding vessel that hung in the void like a predator waiting to strike. As they approached, the ship's defenses came to life, filling the space around them with a hail of plasma fire and pulsing energy beams. Bailey and Zaxxon's enhanced reflexes and heightened senses allowed them to pilot the shuttle through the deadly barrage, weaving and dodging with incredible speed and precision. They returned fire with the shuttle's own weapons, punching through the command ship's shields and blasting smoking holes in its armored hull. With a final desperate maneuver, They brought the shuttle in close and breached the ship's airlock, spilling out into the dimly lit corridors beyond. The strike team moved quickly and silently, their enhanced speed and strength allowing them to overpower the Cortex guards and automated defenses that stood in their way. They fought their way deeper into the ship, following the twisted, pulsing corridors towards the heart of the vessel, where they knew the Cortex High Council would be waiting. The council members were ancient and immensely powerful beings, their true forms hidden within the genetically modified bodies of their slaves. As Bailey and Zaxxon burst into the council chamber, they found themselves face to face with the Cortex leaders, their twisted, monstrous forms looming over them like nightmarish gods. The strike team opened fire, their weapons spitting plasma and searing energy, but the council members seemed to absorb the blows like they were nothing. The Cortex leaders lashed out with their psychic powers, their vast alien intellects crushing down on the minds of the strike team like a physical weight. Bailey and Zaxxon staggered under the assault, their enhanced minds straining to resist the overwhelming force of the council's attack. But they refused to give in, drawing on the power of Dr. Valex's serum and their own indomitable wills to push back against the psychic onslaught. They clashed with the council members on the mental plane, reality itself warping and twisting around them as they struggled for dominance. It was a battle unlike any they had ever faced before, a war of minds and wills that threatened to tear their very sanity apart. The strike team fought with everything they had, their minds and bodies pushed to the very limits of their enhanced abilities. Just as it seemed that all hope was lost, that the council's psychic might would overwhelm them utterly, a miracle happened. The reinforcements promised by the Sire Father arrived, a vast armada of ships from a dozen different species, all united in their determination to end the Cortex threat once and for all. The sudden appearance of the Allied fleet turned the tide of the battle, catching the Cortex forces off guard and allowing Bailey and Zaxxon to press their advantage. With renewed vigor, they redoubled their assault on the council members, their minds linked by the power of Dr. Valex's serum. In a final desperate act of defiance, the Cortex High Council attempted to unleash a devastating psychic shockwave, a blast of mental energy that would destroy the minds of every living thing in the star system. Bailey and Zaxxon felt the shockwave building, felt the council members drawing on every last ounce of their psychic might. But they were ready for it. Linked by the serum's power, their minds acting as one, Bailey and Zaxxon reached out and seized control of the shockwave, redirecting it back at the council members with all the force they could muster. The Cortex leaders screamed in agony as their own psychic attack tore through their minds, ripping apart their consciousness and leaving only shattered remnants behind. With the council destroyed, the Cortex forces fell into disarray, their slave armies bereft of the psychic control that had held them in thrall for so long. The Allied fleet swept through the system, mopping up the last pockets of resistance and freeing the countless species that had been enslaved by the Cortex's cruel regime. Bailey and Zaxxon stood on the bridge of the Cortex command ship, watching as the last of the alien vessels fled into the void. They knew that the war was far from over, that there were still many battles to be fought and many secrets to uncover, but for now they could savor the sweet taste of victory, the knowledge that they had struck a blow against the Cortex that would be felt across the galaxy. With the Cortex High Command shattered, Bailey and Zaxxon led the Allied forces in a galaxy-spanning campaign of liberation. They struck at the heart of the Cortex's power, targeting their most heavily fortified strongholds and research facilities. On the industrial world of Kexar Prime, Bailey spearheaded an assault on a massive Cortex factory complex. His enhanced reflexes and strength allowed him to dodge incoming fire and tear through the enemy's defenses like they were made of paper. He led his strike team deep into the bowels of the facility, planting explosives at key structural points. As the charges detonated, the factory collapsed in on itself, burying the Cortex's twisted genetic experiments and their cruel overseers beneath tons of rubble. The enslaved workers, their minds and bodies finally free of Cortex control, wept with joy as Bailey and his team led them to safety. On the jungle planet of Verdox, Zaxxon infiltrated a heavily guarded Cortex research outpost. Using his intimate knowledge of Cortex security protocols, he slipped past their perimeter defenses and made his way to the central data core. There he discovered a trove of information on the Cortex's origins and the true scope of their genetic manipulations. The data revealed that the Cortex had not always been the masters of the Genesis Initiative, but were once slaves themselves, created and controlled by a mysterious race known as the Progenitors. Zaxxon's mind reeled at the implications. If the Cortex were merely pawns in a much larger game, then the threat to the galaxy's freedom was far greater than anyone had imagined. He downloaded the data and fought his way back out of the compound, his enhanced speed and agility allowing him to evade the Cortex security forces. As Bailey and Zaxxon liberated world after world, they began to piece together the true nature of the Progenitors and their cosmic schemes. It seemed that these enigmatic beings had been manipulating the evolution of life in the galaxy for eons, guiding the development of countless species for their own inscrutable purposes. The Cortex, despite their cruelty and their twisted experiments, were merely the latest in a long line of slave races, created and discarded by the Progenitors as part of some vast, incomprehensible plan. The thought filled Bailey and Zaxxon with a sense of dread. If the Progenitors were the true masters of the Genesis Initiative, then the galaxy's newly won freedom might be nothing more than an illusion, a brief respite before the next phase of the cosmic game began. As they grappled with this realization, a distress signal cut through the static on their comm channels. It originated from an uncharted system on the fringes of known space, a region that had never been explored by any of the galaxy's spacefaring civilizations. The message was garbled and weak, but the urgency in the unknown sender's voice was clear. They claimed to be part of a species that had been fighting the Progenitors for longer than the Cortex had existed, a species that had witnessed firsthand the true scope of the Progenitors' manipulations. Bailey and Zaxxon shared a look of grim determination. They knew that they couldn't ignore this plea for help, not when the fate of the entire galaxy might hang in the balance. They gathered a small team of their most trusted allies, warriors and scientists who had proven themselves in the battles against the Cortex. As their ship tore through the void towards the unknown system, Bailey and Zaxxon couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to embark on their most perilous mission yet. Whatever secrets lay waiting for them at the edge of known space, they knew that they would have to confront them head-on if they hoped to unravel the mystery of the Progenitors and secure the future of the galaxy. As Bailey and Zaxxon's ship descended through the turbulent atmosphere of the uncharted world, they stared in horror at the devastation that stretched out before them. The planet's surface was a nightmarish landscape of shattered cities and scorched earth, the remnants of a war that had raged on a scale beyond comprehension. They followed the distress signal to a massive crater that looked like it had been carved out by a god's hammer. At the bottom of the crater, a hidden door ground open, revealing a tunnel that led deep into the planet's crust. Bailey and Zaxxon exchanged a wary glance before stepping into the tunnel, weapons at the ready. The air grew colder as they descended, the walls of the tunnel lined with strange, pulsing technology that seemed to hum with an eerie, almost living energy. So at last, they emerged into a vast underground city, its towering spires and glittering domes untouched by the destruction above. A delegation of Zephyri, tall and slender beings with luminous eyes and skin that shimmered with an inner light, greeted them with a mixture of hope and desperation. "Welcome, friends from the stars," the Zephyri leader said, her voice a melodic whisper that echoed in their minds. "We have waited long for this day, for the chance to strike back against the Progenitors and their genetic tyranny." As Bailey and Zaxxon listened, the Zephyri shared their tragic history, of how they had once been a thriving galactic power until they refused to submit to the Progenitors' twisted experiments. The Progenitors had unleashed a plague upon the Zephyri, a genetically engineered virus that had decimated their population and forced them into hiding. "But we have not been idle in our exile," the leader said, her eyes flashing with determination. "We have labored in secret to create a weapon that can undo the Progenitors' foul manipulations, a device that can rewrite the very code of life itself. She led them to a vast laboratory, where a pulsing, glowing core hovered in a containment field. "This is the heart of the weapon," she explained, "but it is incomplete. The components needed to power it have been scattered across the galaxy, hidden in places where only the bravest and most skilled can reach them." Bailey and Zaxxon knew that they had no choice but to accept this challenge. The fate of the galaxy, and of every species that called it home, hung in the balance. They gathered their crew and set out on a desperate scavenger hunt, racing against time and the progenitor's forces to collect the weapon components. Their first target was a derelict space station orbiting the event horizon of a supermassive black hole. The station had once been a research outpost of the progenitors, but it had long since been abandoned, its secrets left to be swallowed by the hungry void. As they approached the station, Bailey and Zaxxon's ship was set upon by a swarm of progenitor drones, their sleek insectoid forms darting and weaving through the void with unnatural grace. The crew fought back with everything they had, their weapons tearing through the drones' chitinous hides and sending them spinning off into the darkness. But even as they fought, more drones poured out of the station's airlocks, a seemingly endless tide of alien metal and malice. Bailey and Zaxxon knew that they couldn't hold out forever, that they needed to get inside the station and find the component before the progenitor's reinforcements arrived. With a final desperate push, they blasted their way through the drone swarm and docked with the station. The airlock doors hissed open, revealing a nightmarish labyrinth of twisted corridors and pulsing organic technology. As they fought their way deeper into the station, Bailey couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that something ancient and unspeakably evil was lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike. But he pushed those thoughts aside, focusing on the mission at hand, on the fate of the galaxy that rested on their shoulders. They found the component in the heart of the station, a glowing, pulsing orb that hummed with an eerie, almost living energy. But as they reached out to take it, a monstrous form emerged from the shadows, a progenitor-created abomination that seemed to be a fusion of flesh and metal, its body a grotesque patchwork of a dozen different species. The creature lunged at them, its razor-sharp claws tearing through the air with blinding speed. Bailey and Zaxxon met its charge head-on, their weapons flashing as they fought to keep the monster at bay. It was a battle unlike any they had faced before, a desperate, brutal struggle against a foe that seemed to grow stronger with each passing moment. But through sheer grit and determination, they managed to bring the creature down, its twisted body dissolving into a puddle of steaming ichor. With the component in hand, they raced back to their ship, the station collapsing around them as the black hole's gravity well began to tear it apart. They barely made it out alive, the shockwave from the station's destruction buffeting their ship as they fled into the void. But even as they caught their breath, Bailey and Zaxxon knew that this was only the beginning. There were still more components to find, more battles to be fought, and the progenitor's forces would be more determined than ever to stop them. As they set course for their next target, a dying star on the edge of known space, Bailey couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. But trap or not, they had no choice but to press on. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and they would not rest until the progenitor's hold on it was broken once and for all. With the final components in hand, Bailey, Zaxxon and their team raced back to the Zephyri's hidden stronghold. Dr. Valek and the Zephyri scientists worked feverishly to assemble the reality-altering weapon, their hands shaking with a mix of excitement and trepidation. As the last piece slotted into place, the weapon hummed to life, its surface shimmering with an otherworldly energy. Dr. Valek stepped back, his eyes wide with awe and terror. "It's incredible," he breathed. "The progenitor's technology is beyond anything we've ever seen. This device, it could reshape the very foundations of the universe." Bailey and Zaxxon exchanged a grim look. They had fought too hard, lost too much, to let the progenitors wield such godlike power. "We can't let them get their hands on this," Bailey said, his voice hard with determination. "We have to end this once and for all." The team gathered around a holographic display, studying the schematics of the progenitor megastructure. The vast artificial world was a labyrinth of twisted corridors and pulsing energy conduits, each one leading to the central chamber where the progenitor overlords held court. "We'll have to fight our way through their armies," Zaxxon said, his eyes tracing the route to the center. "But with the HFY weapon, we might just stand a chance." The Allied fleet assembled in orbit, a motley collection of ships from a dozen different species. The Sire Father stood on the bridge of the flagship, his face lined with worry and resolve. "Today we fight not just for our own survival, but for the fate of the entire universe," he said, his voice ringing out across the fleet. "Let us show the progenitors the true strength of the free peoples of the galaxy." As one, the fleet tore open a rift in the fabric of space, plunging through the swirling vortex towards the heart of the progenitor's domain. The progenitor megastructure loomed before them, a twisted mass of alien geometry and pulsing energy. The fleet came under fire immediately, the progenitor's defenses tearing through shields and hull plating like paper. Ships exploded into clouds of debris, the screams of the dying filling the comms. But the Allies pushed forward, their weapons blazing as they carved a path through the progenitor lines. Bailey and Zaxxon led the charge, the HFY weapon pulsing in their hands. They fought their way to the surface of the megastructure, a nightmarish landscape of jutting spires and writhing organic growths. The ground beneath their feet shifted and warped, reality itself bending to the progenitor's will. Progenitor-created abominations surged forth to meet them, their twisted forms defying description. HFY energy blasts and daxamite plasma fire tore through their ranks, but still they came on, an endless tide of nightmares made flesh. Bailey and Zaxxon pressed forward, the HFY weapon guiding them through the chaos. They could feel the device resonating with the megastructure's reality-altering energies, the two technologies locked in a battle for dominance. At last, they reached the heart of the megastructure, a vast chamber that pulsed with a sickly otherworldly light. The progenitor overlords awaited them, their forms shifting and flowing like liquid energy. "Foolish primitives," the overlords hissed, their voices a discordant chorus that echoed in the mind rather than the ears. "You think you can stand against the masters of reality itself?" Bailey raised the HFY weapon, the device thrumming with power. "We've come too far to turn back now," he growled. "Your reign of terror ends here." The battle was joined, a psychic maelstrom that tore at the very fabric of existence. The progenitors unleashed the full might of their reality-warping powers, the chamber dissolving into a kaleidoscope of impossible shapes and mind-shattering colors. But Bailey and Zaxxon held fast, the HFY weapon anchoring them to the shreds of reality. They poured their will into the device, focusing its power on the progenitor overlords. The overlords screamed as the weapon's energies enveloped them, their forms rippling and distorting as they were forced back into the constraints of physical existence. Their powers diminished, their godlike might stripped away. The progenitors were suddenly vulnerable, mortal. Bailey and Zaxxon pressed their advantage, their allies surging forward to join the fray. HFY energy blades and daxamite plasma swords clashed against progenitor flesh, the once immortal beings falling before the onslaught. But even as the progenitor overlords fell, the megastructure itself began to come apart, unable to sustain itself without the reality-bending energies of its masters. The ground heaved and buckled, vast sections of the structure collapsing into the void. Bailey and Zaxxon fought their way back to the surface, their allies falling one by one as the megastructure disintegrated around them. Ships were swallowed by yawning chasms of nothingness, the screams of the dying echoing across the comms. At last they reached the outer limits of the megastructure, the final barrier between them and the void. But even as they prepared to make their escape, a chilling realization struck them like a thunderbolt. The progenitor's final act of defiance was already in motion. A chain reaction had begun, one that would tear the megastructure apart and unleash a reality-warping shockwave across the galaxy. Every species, every world, every atom would be reshaped according to the progenitor's twisted design. Bailey and Zaxxon exchanged a look of grim understanding. There was only one way to stop the shockwave, to save the galaxy from an eternity of genetic slavery. The Zephyri weapon pulsed in their hands, its power thrumming through their enhanced bodies. They knew what they had to do. "Get to the ship," Bailey ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos raging around them. "Get our people out of here." "What about you?" one of the soldiers asked, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. "We're staying," Zaxxon said, his grip tightening on the weapon. "We have to stop the shockwave." The soldier opened his mouth to protest, but Bailey cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Go," he said. "That's an order." The soldier hesitated for a moment, then snapped off a salute. He turned and raced towards the waiting escape ship, shouting for the others to follow. Bailey and Zaxxon watched as their friends and allies boarded the ship, their faces etched with a mixture of grief and determination. They knew that they were leaving their leaders behind, but they also knew that they had to carry on the fight to ensure that their sacrifice would not be in vain. As the escape ship blasted away from the megastructure, Bailey and Zaxxon turned to face the oncoming shockwave. The Zephyri weapon glowed with an inner light, its power building to a crescendo. They shared one final look, a silent acknowledgement of all they had been through together, of the bond that had been forged in the crucible of war and sacrifice. Then, as one, they activated the weapon, pouring all of their will and strength into its reality-altering matrix. A blinding burst of energy erupted from the weapon, a searing lance of pure power that pierced the heart of the shockwave. Bailey and Zaxxon felt the weapon's energy coursing through them, fusing with their very essence, transforming them into something beyond human or Daxamite. They became the focal point of the weapon's power, the conduit through which the shockwave's energy was absorbed and redirected. Their bodies dissolved into pure light, their consciousness expanding to encompass the entire galaxy. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, they saw everything, felt everything. They were the stars and the planets, the dust and the radiation. They were the lifeblood of the galaxy itself. And then, with a final shattering burst of energy, the shockwave was gone. Its power dissipated into the cosmic background radiation. The megastructure imploded, collapsing in on itself like a dying star. But even as the structure crumbled into nothingness, Bailey and Zaxxon remained, their essence infused into the very fabric of the galaxy. They had become the guardians of the new reality, the shepherds of the free species of the cosmos. As the Allied fleet regrouped and began the long process of rebuilding, the legend of Bailey and Zaxxon spread like wildfire. Their names became a rallying cry, a symbol of the unbreakable spirit that had driven the galaxy to throw off the shackles of genetic oppression. In every corner of the galaxy, people whispered their story, passing it down from generation to generation. The tale of the human and the Daxamite who had given everything to save the future, who had transcended their mortal forms to become the eternal guardians of freedom and self-determination. If you finished this story, please subscribe and like the video. Then leave a comment that says, "I liked the story," and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time.